Chapter 152. He didn't mention anything about his ongoing investigation or how he suspected the school disciplinary committee of causing the incident. He only mentioned his connection with the kitchen and its staff. When Angie finished hearing his narration, she felt bad for him than she did earlier. Initially, she only thought Gustav was acquainted with a person there, but now she realized he knew everyone there and had formed a bond with them. 5 people ended up losing their lives, and from the way he narrated it, she could tell that he was also close with the blamed chief cook, who seemed like a nice person to her. Angie and Gustav talked for a few more minutes, and in their discussions, she kept trying to cheer Gustav up. Angie hugged Gustav one more time and rubbed his face affectionately before bidding him good night. The next few days were pretty uneventful in school. The kitchen incident was starting to die down, and the old chefs were reinstated, all except for Boss Danzo, Gustav, and the dead staff, of course. A new chief cook was put in charge, and this person happened to not be an old staff. He was placed in charge by the school board and happened to be quite an influential cook also. Unlike Boss Danzo, this new chief didn't let Gustav continue working with them, saying he wasn't qualified to step foot in the kitchen. Boss Danzo was the reason why Gustav was able to work there in the first place. With him gone, Gustav already expected that this was going to happen, especially since the disciplinary committee were the culprits of the incident, and planned the entire thing because of him. The other staff members pleaded for the new chief to employ Gustav back, but their pleas fell on deaf ears. Gustav, on the other hand, wasn't bothered and kept focusing on investigating the issue until Boss Danzo gave him a call for them to meet somewhere. Boss Danzo and Gustav met in a cake shop not too distant from the school after the activities for the day ended. "Gustav, I'm leaving Plankton City." Boss Danzo was the first to break the few seconds' silence between them. "Why?" Gustav asked with a crestfallen look. "Because there's no point in remaining here if I can't cook. My cooking reputation is practically ruined here since no one will be willing to hire this old geezer, hee. Boss Danzo laughed lightly as he spoke, causing the tense atmosphere to ease up a little. Gustav stared at him for a few seconds before speaking. "What about Mara?" he asked. "That's exactly why I wanted to see you. If not, I would have just left the city without informing anyone and maybe send you a message later, hee. Boss Danzo laughed lightly again after saying that, but Gustav's face still looked as dark as ever. "Gustav, my granddaughter, Mara, will be entering the MBO training camp as a mixed-blood scientist in training, which means you will get to see her from time to time. Please, I want you to take care of her for me," Boss Danzo requested with a pleading look. She's entering the research department?" Gustav asked. "Yes, she was picked a few months back, but this year's batch hadn't been fully picked yet, so she still had to hold on," Boss Danzo explained. "Oh, I see. I will definitely try my best to watch over her if I'm able to pass the entrance test and get enlisted," Gustav stated with a serious look. "That's a relief then. I will have to rely on you for this." Boss Danzo smiled while responding. But why does Boss Danzo sound confident in me passing the entrance test? What if I don't pass?" Gustav asked. "Haha, son, you're kidding, right? After everything you did during the incident, I don't doubt your entry anymore," Boss Danzo replied while laughing lightly. Gustav scratched his head slightly after hearing that. He had nearly forgotten that Boss Danzo already knew about him being stronger than he was supposed to be. "I was worried about your dreams getting crushed by reality and the fact that you will have to come to terms about not being able to get into the MBO with your low-grade bloodline. I had already decided that when you fail and got back, I would take you into my home and take care of you while also passing my legacy down to you, but now I'm no longer worried about that. I'm sure that you'll do well and won't have to suffer the fate of reality crushing your hopes. Good luck, my boy," Boss Danzo said with a smile. Gustav was moved by Boss Danzo's words again. He stood up from his seat in front and gave a low bow. "Thank you for everything, Boss Danzo," he said with a look of gratitude. Even though others within the cake shop were staring at him, he didn't flinch in the slightest and remained in the same position for several seconds. You don't have to do that, my boy. I'm happy to have helped you in any way I can," Boss Danzo said while dismissively waving his hand. From the bottom of his heart, Gustav was grateful for everything Boss Danzo did for him. He still couldn't bear to part ways with him, but there was nothing he could do about the current situation. He swore in his heart to look after Mara if he managed to get into the MBO. This was the way he decided to repay Boss Danzo. Gustav took his seat after doing that and asked Boss Danzo one last question. Which city do you plan on heading to? It's not a very popular city, but you might know it. This city is known as Burning Sands, Boss Danzo said with a profound look. About 30 minutes later, Gustav had arrived back in his apartment. He came to terms with the fact that what had happened, and he couldn't do anything to change it. Mopping around wouldn't help in any way, so Gustav planned his next step. I can't let them go scot-free with what they have done. Gustav leaned his jaw on his knuckles as he spoke. I will make sure they all pay. Chapter 153. I will make sure they all pay, Gustav said with a hate-filled expression before standing up from his bed. He changed out of his school uniform into a full set of black clothing before stepping out of his apartment. Gustav walked towards the balcony on the left side of the corridor. Twee-eye! The door opened up and he walked through it. What appeared in his line of sight were the outlines of buildings around the neighborhood. This building was 7 stories high, so Gustav could see the roofs of other buildings in the area since this was one of the tallest in the neighborhood. Gustav walked towards the edge of the balcony and stared at the neighborhood. Towards the left was a road that led upwards. At the end of the road, which was more than 20 blocks away, were 2 intersections. One led to the left, and the other to the right. While on his right side was a path that led to the back of their building, but it still extended downwards, leading to the sparse forest region before the border. Gustav usually went through the path on the right, but this time he was heading for the east of the border, since he was still investigating the issue of mixed breeds crossing the border, so he would be headed for the path on the left. Gustav brought out a mask from his storage ring. This mask was red with 2 long horns at the top. Although faint, I've been sensing that weird presence more and more recently, Gustav muttered as he put on the mask. Size manipulation has been activated. Gustav grew to a height of over 6 feet, with a slightly muscular frame. Gustav didn't need size manipulation to change his appearance anymore since he had shape-shifting. The problem was, shape-shifting not only took up lots of energy points but also had limitations, since it could only enable him to take the form of a person. While using shape-shifting, he would have to transform to another person that had this stature if he wanted to grow to this size, but with size manipulation, he could just change his size to whatever he wanted it to be and wear a mask to hide his facial look. Gustav turned towards the left and walked to the edge. The other building's rooftop was about 11 meters away from his position, and the entire building was about 5 stories tall. Silent advancement has been activated. Gustav turned around and moved 9 steps away from the edge. Dash has been activated. He suddenly turned back around and bolted forward. Swoosh! His body arrived before the edge immediately after taking 1 step. Once he got to the edge, he squatted slightly without pausing his movement before pushing his body upwards with his legs. Thump! Gustav's body traveled in midair, flying above the neighborhood and the street below. His line of sight only caught a 1-second glimpse of the street downwards while he was in between both buildings' rooftops. Bop! Gustav's body crossed the space between both buildings and landed on the other one. Swoosh! He didn't stop moving. His body blurred once again as he ran across the roof of this building, hardly causing any sounds. Fwum! He leaped upwards again after he got to the edge of this rooftop, and his body traveled several meters in the air before he landed on the next building rooftop. Gustav continued leaping from rooftop to rooftop within the neighborhood, headed towards the east side of the border. The people around the neighborhood barely noticed him due to his speed and his silent movement. In a few minutes he had arrived on the rooftop of the last building in the area. From this rooftop, he could see the sparse forest region ahead, and to his left was the road that divided the border into 2 halves. Gustav leaped downwards and dashed towards the right side. Some minutes later he arrived before the border. Gustav once again carved out miniature circles using his right and left index fingers while moving across the place. When he was done carving out around 50 invisible circles, he clasped his palms together. The instant he did that, 50 milky glowing circles appeared in midair around the place and began to absorb the power of the border into them. The green, red and blue wall of lines were being absorbed from the bottom corner, and in a few seconds, an opening had started forming. The first time when Gustav made use of this ability, he could only make smaller circles due to the fact that gravitational energy container bloodline was unstable and hard to control, so he had to create up to 100 smaller circles before he was able to absorb enough energy to create an opening. If he had made each circle bigger it would have collapsed, so making it smaller was the only way for it to work, which was why it usually took around 3 minutes for the opening to appear. But as Gustav started learning the energy technique he got from the system, he was able to increase the size of the circles as the days went by. Now that he was able to create palm-sized circles, he only needed to create 50 circles to absorb the energy from the border and create an opening under 2 minutes. Once the opening was created, Gustav dashed in along with the circles following behind him. In a few more seconds the border closed up and the energy balls disappeared, phasing with the space around Gustav. This marks 235. Since the entrance test is coming up soon, if I get enlisted I won't be able to come back here for a very long time. I must make sure I gather lots of EXP as well as filling up the gravitational field around me with enough energy just in case of emergencies, Gustav thought as he walked towards the dense forest in the distance. According to the map, there are still 43 places that I haven't visited on this side of the border. In a month and a half, I must make sure I visit every one of them as well as the ones on the other side. Sprint has been activated. Gustav dashed into the distance and leaped onto the branch of the first tree he arrived in front of before he started to leap from one tree to the other. End of Volume 1. Chapter 154. 6 weeks later it was early in the morning around 9 am. The weather seemed lovely and the entire city looked very lively. The sun hung on the eastern part of the blue skies, shining down upon the beautiful modern city. The screens on the surfaces of buildings as well as the ones placed in midair across several parts of Plankton City all showcased one thing. Number of days left till the start of the MBO entrance test. 001. A particular building that extended high into the skies, piercing the clouds above, was looking particularly glamorous today as it stood tall in the heart of the city. It also displayed this same announcement. The MBO entrance test that everyone had been waiting for was going to take place the next day. The youngsters most especially were excited about it. Some were feeling very tensed while others felt confident in their abilities. Rumors had been flying around about the test. Some said it was going to be extremely difficult and brutal, while others said it would be fun-filled. Everyone had heard a thing or two about how the past MBO entrance tests were, even though the entire process wasn't disclosed to the public. One thing that was regular among these rumors was the difficulty level of the test. The MBO entrance test took place every 2 years, so everyone was determined to pass it so as not to spend 2 more years waiting for another chance. At the moment, over 200,000 teenagers and young adults all around the world were said to be interested in participating in the test. People already had an idea of how the MBO was going to divide the test venues and sessions within every city, but no one knew the exact locations where the main test would take place. The MBO was pretty secretive with their actions, but whenever they wanted to do things like this, it would become a public topic. In every mixed-blood household, there was at least one mixed blood interested in joining the MBO, so it was bound to be packed. In a luxurious household, a young boy in dark green long hair who looked no older than 17 stood with his back slightly lowered in front of a man sitting on a chair within the living room. The atmosphere was a bit tense as the man in a sitting position held onto a small black cube. "See, sir, your participation badge has been sent by the MBO. I hope you're prepared for tomorrow." The man spoke with a solemn look. "Yes, father, I am perfectly ready," the teenage boy replied. "You had better be. You have already shamed me by failing the special test. You had better not disappoint me this time." The man spoke with a very powerful voice, causing the surroundings to vibrate. The boy flinched back a bit before replying. "Yes, father, I won't disappoint you this time," he said in a fidgety manner. In another luxurious household, a scene similar to the one previously was playing out, but the atmosphere here wasn't as tense. Instead, it was the opposite. "Baby, you know father loves you. Tread softly. A man with white hair and golden locks behind sat on the sofa while holding on to the hands of a girl who was seated beside him. The girl had a lily-like face with indigo-colored hair. "Ah, I know that already, Papa, humph," the girl replied with a disgruntled expression. "Ha ha ha, don't beat anyone half to death this time. Remember you failed the special test because of your temper," the man said with a burst of laughter. "Humph, they'd better know their place," she replied with a pout. In another household that seemed more humble compared to the other two, a teenage boy was on his knees in front of his mother. They were both dark-skinned and the boy had bushy afro-styled hair with a handsome look. "Mother, give me your blessings," the boy said while displaying a wide set of white teeth. His smile looked extremely charming with his caramel-colored skin. His mother returned his smile with a beautiful smile of her own. She bowed her head slightly and kissed him on his forehead. "My boy, I believe you can do it," she said after withdrawing from him. "Hey, race your badge," she added while extending a black cube towards him. The boy reached out both his palms and she placed the cube on it. Similar scenes played out across the world with slight differences in execution. Everyone participating in the MBO entrance test had badges of participation sent to their homes. Without these badges, they wouldn't be able to access the tall MBO building in the heart of the city. Clang! 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 In a small space surrounded by wood and white walls, a battle was going on between two people. A teenage boy and a young lady clashed repeatedly with different weapons in their grasps. They were both dressed in yukatas and as they jumped around the place, their outfits bloated due to their speed and made small flapping sounds. Their bodies blurred due to their fast movements and small winds were also generated. "Good thing you're able to contain your attacks to a particular range now instead of spreading destruction to the surroundings." A female voice was heard as both figures blurred across the place. "It's all thanks to you, Miss Amy," a light male voice replied. Bang! A loud collision was made and both figures slid backwards, separating from each other. The boy slid back by 17 feet, while the young lady slid back by 3 feet. Both of them straightened their bodies and stared at each other with a light smile displayed on their faces. In both their hand were purple metallic poles with pointy tips. "Good job, you're able to measure to 1/10 of my strength now." The female who happened to be Miss Amy was the first to speak up. "Even though it's just 1/10, I'm glad," the boy who was obviously Gustav replied. "You've really grown in these past 6 months," Miss Amy said while walking towards Gustav. "A truly unbelievable amount of growth," she added. Gustav at this point was around 59 in height. He was now taller than Miss Amy with a slightly buffer look. "It's all thanks to Miss Amy," Gustav replied while staring into Miss Amy's eyes with a smile. "No, it's all due to your hard work and mysterious power which you never revealed to me," Miss Amy said while placing her right palm on his chest while staring back into his eyes. "Do you plan on keeping this secret from your mentor forever?" Chapter 155. "Do you plan on keeping this secret from your mentor forever?" Miss Amy asked. Gustav's face still had the smile on even after hearing her question. He continued staring at her with a calm look while responding. "But Miss Amy already knows that I can copy the appearance of whoever I wish to." Miss Amy was very shocked when she found out about this, about 1 month ago, because she had always believed that Gustav's original bloodline wasn't useless like everyone said. She believed its ability was only limited by the grade, and just as she had thought, his bloodline was truly a rare type. His bloodline really has a lot of potential. "Well, if not for the stunt you pulled, I wouldn't have known about that since you never told me outright, but still. We both know that your ability to change your appearance still doesn't explain your insane strength, either does it explain some of the things that happened in the past," Miss Amy voiced out with a complicated expression displayed on her beautiful face. Like?" Gustav asked with a look of curiosity. "Like how those mixed bloods lost their bloodlines," Miss Amy responded with her eyes widening slightly. "Miss Amy already knows enough. I will leave the rest to your imagination," Gustav said with a small chuckle. "TCH, hiding things from even me," Miss Amy said as she removed her hand from Gustav's chest. Gustav chuckled even more at her response and proceeded to sit on the floor. Miss Amy also did the same and sat beside him. For a few seconds there was silence between them, causing the atmosphere to give off a peaceful vibe. A small sigh escaped from Miss Amy's mouth after several minutes had gone by. "Tomorrow is the day, huh?" she voiced out with a low tone. Gustav kept looking forward with a solemn expression. "This is our last training session together. I sure won't miss a troublemaker like you," Miss Amy muttered. "On the other hand, I will miss the times we spent together, Miss Amy, and I'll be sure to pay back your kindness in the future," Gustav said with a smile as memories of the last 6 months came flooding through his mind. "Where did you learn those cheesy lines?" "Save them for your lover," Miss Amy said with a dismissive look. Gustav laughed after hearing her words again. "With your current strength, passing the physical test phase shouldn't be a problem, but the rest will be based on a variety of other things. Watch out for the other tests. The main test will be a combination of 5 things." Miss Amy paused before turning her face to stare at Gustav while raising her index finger. "Bloodline, prowess, intelligence, wisdom, and mental capability." Miss finished raising her 5 fingers and placed her hand down after listing out those things. "Bloodline will always be the #1 requirement because the MBO believes that even without intelligence, or the rest of the other qualities, a mixed blood with a high-grade bloodline can still be trained to achieve greatness," Miss Amy explained with slightly furrowed eyebrows. "From what I remember, your bloodline used to be below F grade, but it has undergone some changes within this past 6 months. We can only hope for it to be as high as C grade, because if not, passing the test would be a problem," Miss Amy said with a look of worry. Unless I get involved, which would cause some suspicions, Miss Amy could already sense that Gustav's bloodline was no longer below F grade. Anyone with a brain would be able to tell after seeing the change his original bloodline had undergone. Gustav wanted to assure Miss Amy that he met the bloodline requirement, but if he did, he would practically be admitting the fact that he was aware of his bloodline increasing in grade, which would arouse suspicions, since the only known way of figuring out your bloodline grade was by undergoing the examination in a lab. Gustav didn't want to risk the system being exposed even till now. Let's hope the examiners are a little lenient even though my bloodline doesn't qualify," Gustav said in response, even though he knew this was impossible. "Ha ha ha, those old foogies, that's impossible. But don't worry. I believe in you, Gustav," Miss concluded with a smile. Gustav smiled back. "At the very least I can't betray her expectations of me," he said internally with a resolute look. "Have you gotten your participation badge?" Miss Amy asked. Participation badge?" Gustav voiced out with a clueless look. Miss Amy explained to him that it was something received by young adults all over the world participating in the test. "That's the only way you can be allowed entry into the tower." Miss Amy concluded her explanation with this. "Oh, that tower!" Gustav's eyes shone a bit of excitement after hearing that. "I finally get to enter." The MBO Space/Underground Tower 007 is where the registration will take place, and it's also where kids from this city interested in joining the MBO will be addressed by the higher-ups," Miss Amy explained. "Oh, I see. How do I get my badge then?" Gustav asked. "It will be sent to your home by the MBO themselves. Although they don't send it to everyone, you will definitely have received it," Miss Amy assured Gustav. Gustav's mind became calm after hearing that. It should be home by now then, Gustav thought. "Gustav, it's time for you to show them what you're capable of. Are you up to the task?" Miss Amy asked with a smirk. H&M. Gustav nodded in response with a look of resolve, but then he remembered something. "Will Miss Amy be picking another student from the school to train after I get in?" Gustav asked. Miss Amy extended her right hand towards Gustav's forehead upon hearing his question. "Flick." She flicked his forehead lightly. "Ow." Gustav held his forehead with a look of pain. Even though she barely put strength into her finger when she flicked his forehead, it still hurt. "There can only be one Gustav. No other student is interesting enough for me to spend so much time with," she said with a smirk. Chapter 156. "I doubt anyone besides me would be able to take your bullying either," Gustav replied while faking a look of annoyance. Ha ha ha! Both of them burst into laughter after that exchange for several seconds before stopping. Silence reigned for many seconds as they stared at nothing with smiles on their faces while reminiscing. Gustav, I will be resigning from teaching. Miss Amy finally broke the silence. Gustav was not surprised by her declaration, but he still asked. Why? Due to your discovery within the border. I have to finish investigating that issue, so I will be traveling to another city, 2 weeks from now, Miss Amy said with a solemn look. Gustav stared at her with a contemplative expression. He was quite speechless and didn't know how to respond. Don't worry, we'll meet again in the future. Don't forget that I still have to receive my compensation, hee. Miss Amy laughed lightly after speaking. Gustav couldn't help but smile back. This was the very first time he was seeing Miss Amy show so many emotions in an hour. What Gustav didn't know was, Miss Amy smiled more in the last 6 months than she ever did in the last 6 years. She never shone such in classes or around anyone else he knew besides him, so even though she kept mentioning compensations, Gustav knew that she truly cared for him, and he was very grateful for that. So Miss Amy, which city will you be headed to? Gustav asked with a curious gaze. An hour later Gustav had arrived in his apartment. Today's events played out in his mind and he couldn't help but look very focused at the moment. Oh, Miss Amy mentioned the badge. Gustav remembered this and stood up from his bed before he started checking around his apartment for the badge. Miss Amy already described its appearance to him and assured him that his apartment's security protocols couldn't stop the cube from finding its way in so long as it was sent by the MBO. Gustav looked around for over 30 minutes, but he couldn't find anything like what Miss Amy had described to him. Even though he knew he had checked properly while also making use of his abilities, Gustav still decided to search the entire apartment once again, and this time it took him 30 minutes. After he finished doing that, he sat on his bed with a dumbfounded and defeated expression. Did the MBO make a mistake or what? Where is the participation badge I was supposed to receive? Or am I one of those who didn't receive one? Gustav considered these possibilities, but when he remembered Miss Amy's look of confidence when she mentioned he would have gotten one, he stopped doubting. Gustav's mind wandered to various things and possible reasons as to why he couldn't find it in his apartment. Fill your name, address, and other details on the collection form if you are interested in participating in the test. Remember, you cannot participate if you are not a Zulu-ranked mixed blood by then. Gustav's mind went back to the time when the MBO inspectors visited their school. That's it, he voiced out with a look of realization. Looks like you'll have to visit that place, Gustav said with a slight frown. When he filled in his information on the collection form 6 months back, he hadn't rented this apartment yet, so he filled in the address of his parents' house. Gustav guessed that the cube must have been sent to his former household. If I'm gonna visit them, I might as well get it done before nightfall, Gustav muttered and stood up to change his clothes. After a few minutes had gone by, Gustav left his apartment and headed towards the nearest bus station. Just as he left the building, Angie came out of her apartment and headed to his. Calm. Hey, Gustav, are you there? She raised her voice while knocking on his door. 10 minutes later, Gustav arrived in his old neighborhood. He stared at the familiar bungalow-type houses within the vicinity. He kept walking on the side of the road while looking around, checking for differences, but he soon lost interest when he didn't notice anything. His appearance didn't garner ridiculing glances as it used to in the past because the people moving around the neighborhood couldn't even recognize him. He had changed quite a lot in that past 6 months. He was close to being 6 feet tall now, with a buff build, charming looks, and smooth blonde hair. Even his manner of walking had a lot of elegance mixed in. He had a very straight and confident look, unlike before when he was always looking timid. Gustav arrived in front of the butter-colored bungalow building he lived in for 17 straight years, and memories began flooding in once again. He had an expressionless look as he arrived in front of the door and knocked gently. Calm. Darling, please get the door, I'm still busy with this. A familiar feminine voice drifted into Gustav's ears from inside. Darling? Gustav remembered that his mother only said that word when a person was around. Click. The door made a clicking sound and shifted to the side. "Huh! Oh!" Gustav stared at the familiar figure that appeared in front of him with a slightly surprised look while the figure stared back at him with a dumbfounded expression. "Who are you?" the man who opened the door asked with his left eyebrow raised slightly. It was a middle-aged-looking man with a square-shaped face sporting dirty blonde hair. Although Gustav also had dirty blonde hair, it still looked more refined and beautiful compared to that of the middle-aged man. "He doesn't even recognize me." Gustav smiled as this thought came to his mind. "I guess this is all for the best then. I don't need any senseless banter." Gustav changed the tone of his voice, making it deep before speaking. I am participating in the MBO entrance test. I seem to have sent the wrong address to the MBO, so my participation badge ended up here. I'm coming to get it," Gustav said with a polite look. "Oh, you mean that?" the man asked while pointing towards the shelf area inside the apartment. Gustav's sight followed where his finger pointed at inside the apartment from his position at the entrance. He saw a black cube floating above the shelf on the other side of the living room. Chapter 157. From his position at the entrance, Gustav's sight followed where the man's finger pointed to inside the apartment. He saw a black cube floating above the shelf on the other side of the living room. "Oh, thank you," Gustav said and walked in while the man moved towards the side. Gustav walked into his former abode and looked around the place. He noticed that neither his brother nor his mother was in the living room, which gave him a sense of relief. He really didn't mind meeting them, but he would rather not spend an extra second than he was supposed to in here. "If the cube is yours, it should react to your presence," the man spoke from behind while staring at Gustav's back. Gustav arrived in front of the shelf, and just as he said, the cube flew towards him and landed on his palm. "I will now take my leave." Gustav turned around to head out, but he was blocked by the man. "My son is also participating in the MBO entrance test. I want him to have allies with high-graded bloodlines such as yourself," the man voiced out with a pleading look while staring at Gustav. Gustav stared back at him with an expressionless look. "I'm sorry, mister, I can't be allied with your son," he said while moving towards the left and passing by the man's side. "But why? I just showed you kindness by letting you into my home, and you want to repay me with this ungrateful attitude," he voiced out loudly. Gustav paused before he got to the door and slightly turned his head towards the side. "I can't help your son since I only have an F-grade bloodline," Gustav voiced out with a smile. "What? You're an F-grade mixed blood?" the man voiced out with a look of disbelief. "H&M. Gustav nodded in response. "I allowed such filth into my home." "Toy!" the man shouted with a look of repulse and spat towards the side. "Get out!" he shouted out once again. "I was already." Before Gustav could complete his sentence, a woman rushed out from the passageway behind, with a look of urgency. She looked to be in her early 40s, sporting long brown hair. She bore an uncanny facial resemblance to Gustav. Even though Gustav looked a lot different from how he used to be, they still had similar facial looks, which was noticeable if one looked closely enough. "What's wrong, honey?" she said immediately she arrived before the man and held onto his shoulder. "Look at this F-grade filth that walked into our home," the man shouted while pointing at Gustav. "What? An F?" The woman, who was obviously Gustav's mother, was speaking when she noticed the face of Gustav, which was slightly turned towards their direction. "You," she said with widened eyes. "What's wrong?" the man beside her, who happened to be her husband as well as Gustav's birth father, asked when he noticed the weird look on his wife's face. "Gustav," she voiced out with a look of disbelief. "Eh?" the father exclaimed with shock before turning to stare at Gustav. His eyes widened as he finally noticed the resemblance between the boy and his wife. He stared at Gustav from head to toe, and from toe to head several times. The look of disbelief was so obvious on his face. What's with that confident look and expression? What? How? Did he change so much? Gustav's father couldn't help but ask with his eyes nearly popping out of their sockets. The last time his father visited the house was around 8 months ago, so he couldn't understand how such a tremendous change could occur in less than a year. It made no sense to him no matter how much he thought about it. "But you said he was dead," the father said while pushing his wife's arms away from his shoulders. Honey, I. She stuttered repeatedly while trying to reply. Gustav snorted and turned around to leave. Gustav, hold on. This isn't what you think you are, precious soon too. You have to look after your brother in the MBO, the mother said frantically. The father was once again dumbfounded by her statement, and wondered where this was coming from. Gustav paused his steps again, and turned around to stare at her. "I'm just an F grade though. How can I be your precious son or watch over your truly beloved son?" Gustav asked. "Come on, son, don't be like that. I know that with your teacher entering into the MBO should be an easy task. Won't you watch over your little brother, Hendrik?" she said with a loving gaze while staring in Gustav's direction. "What a shameless woman," Gustav said internally before turning around. "She's no longer my teacher and I have to pass the test before getting in," Gustav stated just as he got to the door. "Oh, is that so?" The look on his mother's face suddenly changed into that of disgust. "I knew you would never be able to keep such a high-class person as your teacher. Useless will always be useless," she voiced out with a repressed look. The father stared at them from the side in silence, since he was unable to keep up with the conversation. "Don't think you're better than my lovely son, he will defeat you in the camp. Yes, he has already left home for the tower as a special candidate, he won't be joining the likes of you for the test," she added with a crazed look. Gustav opened the door. His face was still as expressionless as ever. He couldn't even be bothered to banter with her. "I have been lenient twice. The next time your son crosses path with me, bearing foolish intentions, I will destroy him," Gustav said with such a cold tone that even his parents shivered after hearing his words. Bang! Before they could regain their composure, Gustav had already left the apartment. "What was that? I sensed the energy of a serial ranked from him. What is going on?" Chapter 158. "What was that? I sensed the energy of a serial ranked from him. What is going on?" the father asked with a confused look while staring at his wife. "Serial ranked? You must be mistaken," she responded with a look of disbelief. She couldn't even begin to imagine Gustav's strength being up to that level. "Hendrik is only a step 4 Zulu ranked now, there's no way that an F grade would already be serial ranked." Minutes later Gustav arrived back at his apartment. He already had a feeling that some kind of drama would have happened once he went back there, so he wasn't too surprised. He decided to tone down his replies so he wouldn't have to spend more time than he wanted to in that sickening household. One thing he was happy about was the fact that his parents hadn't changed, and he guessed that Hendrik hadn't changed either. He hadn't forgotten about what he went through in that household, but he was still feeling grateful that he at least had a roof to stay under during those years, which was why he never thought of really dealing with them. Now, he felt they had made use of the leniency points they had left with him, so he decided that the next time anyone from that household tried anything foolish, he would do to them as he had done to the others in the past. "Since I was able to cause so many problems for the biggest school in the city, dealing with a small family is nothing." Gustav chuckled lightly and took off his red jacket before sitting on his reading chair. He brought out the black cube from his storage device. Swum! Immediately after he grabbed the cube, rays of light suddenly erupted from it. Time of registration, 8 o'clock a.m. Venue, MBOTOWER. Gustav stared at the information that appeared within the flash of bright light. In about 3 seconds the light dimmed and the cube dissolved into Gustav's palm. "Huh!" Gustav was surprised by the sudden development. Miss Amy didn't tell him that this was gonna happen. "Troyan." His palm glowed up and a number appeared on it. 00126. A lot of mixed bloods will probably be trying their luck this year," Gustav muttered after seeing the number that appeared on his palm. No one needed to tell him before he knew that the number couldn't be washed off by any cleaning agent, or taking a bath. It was obvious that it would be there till the end of the test or something. "They'll be saying goodbye to this apartment soon," Gustav stood up and started walking around the place. It brought a lot of benefits, he muttered as he looked around. I won't need to hide my strength from now on. If my cover-up plan works out well, I won't even need to hide my usage of different bloodline abilities, Gustav said with a look of relief. But it will also be stupid to reveal everything. Who knows the number of enemies I will make in the future? Best leave some surprises for them when they come to challenge me, Gustav said with a contemplative look. Calm. Calm. Gustav heard a knock on the door and went to open it. Gustav. You're back. A sweet feminine voice drifted into his ears. The next morning Gustav woke up around 6 am. His daily tasks had undergone a change when the system finished its upgrade almost 2 months back, but Gustav still only needed 30 minutes to complete them. Daily tasks: frowny face, execute a 60 feet vertical jump, status, completed, run around your neighborhood 70 times in a span of 30 minutes, status, completed, do 900 push-ups, status, completed, difficulty level, see rewards: frowny face plus 200 EXP, plus 1 vitality, plus 1 endurance. Gustav stared at the rewards after completing today's task and nodded with a look of gratification before heading back to his apartment. The daily tasks were not only different from before but also changed to different tasks each day. The rewards every day was also different based on the difficulty of the daily tasks. If the difficulty was higher, he would be able to get more rewards. Although there was not any sweat on his body, Gustav still headed to the shower after getting back home. In a few more minutes he had dressed up. Around 7 am Angie came to knock on his door, and they both headed out of the building after her parents bid them a tear-filled farewell, while wishing both of them good luck. Angie was dressed in a green sweater and slim blue trousers, while Gustav wore a crimson-colored jacket and black pants trousers. Angie looked really athletic today, and it was due to the test. Everyone was dressing up in clothes that would be good for easy movement. Only a stupid person would wear any kind of clothes to the entrance test. Immediately after they arrived outside their apartment building, they noticed a hover bike in the distance. On it was a beautiful lady sporting ash-colored hair. Hey kids, let's go, she voiced out with a sweet smile. Miss Amy. Angie smiled while voicing out and hastened her steps. This is a surprise. Gustav didn't expect that Miss Amy would be transporting them with her bike. Angie sat on the bike first, and Gustav sat behind her. Hold on tight, Miss Amy warned as she started the engine of her bike. This warning was for Angie since this was her first time boarding Miss Amy's bike. Angie nodded and held on to Miss Amy's waist. She shivered when she felt Gustav's fingers lock onto her waist from behind. Since Gustav was behind, he didn't notice the shade of red that was already forming on her cheeks. Swee-eye! Miss Amy's hoverbike sped off into the distance while carrying the three of them. While on the bike, Angie now understood why Miss Amy asked her to hold on tight. Miss Amy was moving with so much speed that the buildings in the vicinity were blurring right before her eyes as they streaked past them. Even though her bloodline granted her speed, the speed of the bike was way beyond her capacity. This had her wondering, how is Miss Amy able to ride at such speed without causing any accidents? Chapter 159. This had her wondering, how is Miss Amy able to ride at such speed without causing any accidents? In a few minutes, they were already closing in on the long tower positioned in the heart of the city. Gustav and Angie stared at the majestic tower that kept getting closer in their line of sight. The closer they got, the more Angie felt tense, but as for Gustav, the closer they got the more his excitement grew. Of course, being a good actor, Gustav was able to hide this efficiently. They weren't the only ones headed there, so road traffic was already forming the closer they got. Since Miss Amy was using a hoverbike, she was able to move amid the other vehicles in the vicinity. A lot of other participants within different vehicles stared at the bike streaking through the road with ease and wondered how a bike could move with so much speed in such a clustered space. In about 2 more minutes they closed in on an area barricaded by energy walls similar to that of the border, but Gustav could tell that they were on different levels and somehow this area was a lot more secure. It was no longer a residential area. Not even a single house could be seen around here. Different roads linked to the barricaded energy walls. Within the barricaded walls, the high MBO tower could be seen standing proudly and looking majestic. Armored vehicles moved in and out of the barricaded area, and security operatives in blue and black technologically advanced suits also moved around the place. Miss Amy slowed down their speed and came to a stop several hundred meters from the entry point of the barricaded energy walls. "This is as far as I go, kids," Miss Amy said after stopping the movement of the bike on the side of the road. Gustav and Angie nodded before getting down from the bike. They walked forward a bit and turned to face Miss Amy. "Good luck, you both," Miss Amy said to them with a smile. "Thanks, Miss Amy." They both answered and turned around to stare at the facility in front for a bit before moving forward. "Gustav," Miss Amy called out to Gustav after he and Angie walked a few feet forward. "Keep moving, I'll catch up with you," Gustav said to Angie before turning around and walking back towards Miss Amy. Other vehicles could be seen moving towards the entry point of the large vicinity ahead. Lots of them passed by Miss Amy's and Gustav's position and arrived at the entry points in front. Miss Amy was the only person with a vehicle that stopped this far from the entry point. Is something wrong, Miss Amy?" Gustav asked with a look of curiosity. "Are you sure about Angie? I understand that she's a lovely girl and I also like her, but is she really cut out to be your accomplice? Don't you think she might pull you down? You know there's a vast difference between you and her." Miss Amy voiced out her concerns. "I understand what you mean, Miss Amy, but I can assure you that although she doesn't seem it, she actually is quite special. She might surprise you today," Gustav said with an assuring look. Gustav speaking up for Angie made Miss Amy reevaluate Angie. Maybe he sees some kind of potential in her that I don't. Also, it's an individual test, so if she fails we won't be able to partner up in the future, so I can't be sure if we will become accomplices in the future," Gustav added. "Don't jump to conclusions so soon. What makes you think every test is going to be individual?" Miss Amy said before turning on her hoverbike's engine again. "Huh!" Gustav exclaimed. "Just be careful. You're a shining star. I don't want your light to be dimmed," Miss Amy said before turning her bike around and zooming off into the distance. Gustav's face returned to normal after Miss Amy's departure. He turned around to stare at the facility with a determined look before starting to move forward. At this moment, some participants had also gone through the entry point after going through physical examinations and some security protocols. No vehicle was allowed into the vicinity. The MBO branch in any city was always well guarded and restricted from public entry. Even a rich and influential mixed blood wouldn't be allowed in unless for official purposes. A lot of mixed bloods that were brought to this place with luxurious vehicles were also denied entry, so every mixed blood who wanted to participate had to get down at the entry point. Gustav, Angie, and many other mixed bloods strutted into the vicinity after passing the examination protocols. Immediately they got in. What appeared in their line of sight were several small buildings connected to the base of the large tower. Technological power plants constructed with power crystals could be seen around. These plants were in charge of powering up the large tower that was so tall, it pierced the clouds. The outer surface of the tower had glowing colors on them that prevented anyone from seeing what was within. It was structured to look unique and was as wide as 100 skyscrapers placed together. No one knew how tall it was since that information wasn't publicly disclosed, but a lot of rumors have been spread about how its tip crossed the outer layer of the Earth's atmosphere. The vicinity surrounding the tower was also very wide, so the participants would have to walk for up to an hour before they could arrive at the tower. There were still vehicles moving within the facility. Mostly armored vehicles, but they didn't even bother trying to carry any one of the participants. The participants had been told at the entry point that they had to walk towards the tower themselves. Gustav and Angie were currently moving with a group of 60. Chatter. 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 Of course, being teenagers, there was no way these kids wouldn't interact with each other. Although a lot of them were tensed and didn't interact with anyone, the rest weren't bothered. Chapter 160. Gustav remained focused and stared at the building ahead while activating God's eyes. God eyes has been activated. Gustav's eyes zoomed in on the building. So many energy points for a single building. Even God's eyes are having a hard time calculating it. In Gustav's line of sight, the base of the building had a stable yellowish with green energy flow, but the energy points kept increasing in number. 798, 932, 534, 678, 002. This was the highest energy count Gustav had seen while making use of God's eyes, yet it still kept increasing. Gustav's sight started traveling upwards from the base of the MBO tower. Even though God's eyes had improved over the past weeks, it was still impossible for him to see the top of a building that was more than 10,000 meters in height. Gustav was intrigued even more. Just as he started retracting his vision, he noticed something along the road that led to the base of the tower about 100 feet away from their current position. What's going on? Gustav wondered with a curious look. He was currently walking in the middle of the crowd, so he wanted to move further ahead to check on what he noticed. However, before he could, something happened. Boom! 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 The ground was suddenly blasted open, toward the east, west, and north. Kaya! The participants were caught unawares, and about 13 of them started falling into the wide holes. The cracks continued to widen across the ground, and more of them kept falling into the holes. Mixed bloods with fast reaction time quickly activated their bloodlines and leaped out of the coverage area of the crumbling ground. Gustav leaped about 30 feet forward while Angie dashed forward with speed along with several other mixed bloods. Ruckus! 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 When everyone had escaped the range of the crumbling grounds, they started looking around in confusion, while voicing out their suspicions and concerns. Behind them was a 300 feet wide hole created from the combination of 3 holes. They were so deep that the bottom couldn't be seen. This frightened everyone. About 20 of the participants had fallen into this hole. Dash. What's happening? Dash. Why is such an incident happening in the MBO yet no official is trying to help us? Everyone looked around and noticed that the tanks and other vehicles moving around in the vicinity didn't even bother with them. The crumbling of the ground was loud enough since it sounded like an explosion, which meant the officials in the vicinity must have heard it. Everyone was wondering why the officials ignored it. Krakem! 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 Just as the participants were still voicing out their confusion, the wide hole suddenly started mending itself. Broken pieces of the ground started joining together and creating more. In a few seconds, the ground had gone back to its initial look. Huh! Everyone was surprised to see this happening, and wondered what was going on. Angie, let's keep moving, Gustav said to Angie, who was also gobsmacked by the current development. Eh? Angie exclaimed, but Gustav didn't mention anything else before moving forward. Angie quickly followed him from behind. Hey, you still want to keep going after seeing what just happened? What if the ground collapses again? A boy with a silver-colored forehead called out to them with a worried look. You want to stay here? Gustav asked without turning around. His question brought everyone back to reality. They couldn't get to the tower without walking. Since the officials in the vicinity kept ignoring them, they could either decide to keep moving forward or backward. Either way, they couldn't escape walking on the ground. Gustav and Angie were at the forefront now, and everyone else followed behind them. Angie, this way. Whenever Gustav moved to the side, he would call out to Angie to also follow his footsteps. Sometimes he would move 7 steps to the left, other times he would move several steps to the right also. The mixed bloods behind guessed that he was probably doing that because he didn't want to trigger the ground crumbling, so they decided to follow in his and Angie's footsteps. This continued for some time, and some of the people behind grew tired of Gustav moving about like a drunk. Dash. Why do we have to follow this guy and do what he does? Dash. I think it's because he knows the parts of the ground that is dangerous. Dash. Don't be ridiculous, how could he know when we're all clueless about it? Dash. I'm tired of moving about like a monkey. They voiced their displeasure. Gustav, who was at the forefront moving from side to side with Angie, heard their voices and said, I didn't ask for anyone to follow me, if you're free to walk however you wish to. The 3 who spoke from behind stared at Gustav's back and gritted their teeth before straying from the lineup of the others following Gustav. Ah, you see, I knew this monkey was just leading us around. One of them spoke while walking on the right side of the road several feet behind Gustav. Angie, we need to cross 70 feet in the next 3 seconds. Go! Gustav voiced out and dashed forward. Dash has been activated, whoosh. Angie heard that and reacted instantaneously by dashing out after him. The mixed bloods behind them wondered why they suddenly sped up, but once Gustav and Angie traveled more than 70 feet forward, loud explosions rocked the grounds again. Boom! 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 6 different parts of the ground blasted open this time. The smile on the face of the mixed blood who spoke earlier froze as his body started falling into the first hole when the ground beneath his legs disappeared. The other 3 that agreed with him also started falling into the same hole. As the holes on the ground kept expanding, more and more mixed bloods fell into them, but others that were a bit farther from those 3 were able to react in time and activate their bloodlines before distancing themselves from the grounds that were caving in. Gustav and Angie had already crossed the area of effect, so they weren't affected. Gustav turned around with Angie and they both stared at the holes that kept expanding with a contemplative look. Miss Amy mentioned that the MBO had unorthodox methods of doing things. This means the test has already begun, Gustav said internally with a smile on his face. Chapter 161. This means the test has already begun, Gustav said before turning around. Let's go, Angie, Gustav said and started walking forward again. Angie quickly caught up to him since she didn't want to be left behind. The rest of the participants realized that Gustav and Angie must have dashed forward because of the incident. They quickly followed in Gustav and Angie's footsteps. At that moment, over 30 of the participants had fallen in. About 33 of them were left. In a few seconds, the ground behind mended itself and closed up again. Gustav and Angie practically led the crowd behind them, sometimes moving in a zigzag-like pattern. The talkative mixed bloods had already shut their mouths. They were now feeling tensed as they struggled to follow Gustav and Angie's every step. Floor 617, watch room, inside a vast room filled with screens and computer-like technology devices. About 50 people were in sitting positions tapping onto holographic keyboards. The holographic screens in the room were split into smaller screens that showed different places. The places displayed on the holographic screens were the different angles of the facility. Footages of different places around the tower were being displayed on the screens, and young people could be seen walking on every road that led to the tower. A young-looking man dressed in an orange military-like jacket with black stripes stood behind the large screens with his hands locked behind his back. He had long flowing yellow hair that reached his lower back. How many batches have come in so far? He asked with an authoritative look. About 6 of them, sire. Each batch originally had about 40 to 60 mixed bloods, bringing the total number of mixed bloods to around 300. However, only around 60 of the participants managed to make it to the base of the tower. One of the people tapping on the holographic keys spoke from behind him. Good, the man replied while his sight moved to observe the different spots displayed on the screens. He noticed something and paused his sight on the top right corner of the screen. This batch seems to have the highest regained number of participants, he muttered with an intrigued look. On this particular screen, the participants were about 30 in number, moving speedily towards the base of the tower. On other screens, the number of the participants ranged from 12 to 15, which was why he was intrigued about the number of participants retained in this batch. They seemed to be following that boy over there. His sight closed in on a boy with dirty blonde hair, leading the crew. Even though there was a girl with 2 horns following him by the side, it was apparent that the person leading was the boy. The yellow-head man stared at how the boy avoided different spots on the ground while traveling towards the tower. Interesting. Looks like he can see the traps, the man muttered while analyzing the boy's looks. Another promising candidate might have shown up, but it's too early to judge, he said internally. Gustav and the rest were already about 700 feet away from the base of the tower. The other participants following Gustav and Angie for more than 15 minutes now noticed that they had not faced the problematic situations they did in the past. The ground didn't blast open while they followed in his footsteps. They were intrigued about how Gustav was able to pull this off, but they were more concerned with getting to the tower, which was the primary goal. After a few more seconds, they crossed another 100 feet, but immediately they did, Gustav paused his footsteps. The rest behind also paused and stared at Gustav from behind with a look of confusion. Gustav stood there for quite a while with his irises glowing scarlet and green. "Hey, what's going on? Why did he stop?" The participants behind were starting to get impatient after seeing that Gustav hadn't moved for about 30 seconds. "Is something the matter?" Angie asked from his side after noticing Gustav's intense staring. Yes, something is up, but I need to confirm my suspicions first," Gustav said and proceeded to sit on the ground. Dash. Dash. "What's going on? Dash. Why is he sitting?" The crowd behind couldn't understand Gustav's actions. Angie also didn't understand it, but she didn't question him. Instead, she proceeded to join him in sitting on the ground. This continued for more than 2 minutes. Gustav just sat down there and kept looking forward. Due to his strange actions, everyone was scared of moving forward. Some of them even approached him and Angie to ask if anything was the matter. Gustav only smiled at them and replied, "I feel like taking a rest. You guys can move along." Even after hearing Gustav's statement, no one still moved. Some of them were good at sensing vibrations due to their bloodline. However, their unique senses still failed them when the ground was caving in because they only sensed it at the last second. "What madness is this? We can't just sit around and do nothing." A chubby boy with a bald black head walked towards Gustav and Angie while speaking. He was already tired of standing around, so he decided to do something. "Hey, keep leading us," he threatened after arriving behind Gustav. Isn't it a little too early for me to be meeting nuisances?" Gustav sighed after hearing the chubby boy speak from behind. "Hey, did you hear me? Either you keep leading us or ill." Before he could complete his sentence, Gustav interrupted. "Is it wise for you to cause trouble here? You know where we are, right?" Gustav said without turning around. The boy flinched back after hearing that. He remembered his father warning him not to cause any problems within the MBO branch. He moved back with a wary expression. "Okay, screw it, I'm gonna keep moving forward." One of them voiced out and activated her bloodline. The chubby one stared at the person moving, who happened to be a girl with green skin and a brown tail. Immediately she activated her bloodline, red ore-like energy covered her entire body, and she started moving forward. Chapter 162. Everyone stared at her as she moved past Gustav and Angie's position. After she crossed over 20 feet, the chubby boy decided to join her. He also activated his bloodline, causing black metallic shards to cover his face, hands and legs. Bang! 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 His movement caused the ground to make loud sounds. He caught up to the girl, and they kept on moving forward together. Seeing the way they weren't affected, everyone joined them, running forward and leaving Gustav and Angie behind. Immediately the two at the front crossed about 70 feet. Silver-colored cannons suddenly sprouted from the ground. Swoon! 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 About 17 cannons with 2 or 3 mini-cannons sprouted out in less than 5 seconds, shooting blue beams towards the participants. Bing! 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 Since every participant was a Zulu-ranked mixed blood, 3 seconds was more than enough for them to prepare to dodge the attacks. However, immediately they tried to move their body, a strange pressure suddenly descended upon the vicinity. Thump! Everyone suddenly felt the weight of their bodies increase by 2. Due to this sudden change, a lot of mixed bloods were not able to move their body fast enough and were hit by the beams. Bam! 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 About 7 people were hit in one go. Immediately a beam slammed into a person, they'd pass out. Once their body collided with the ground, it would open up, and their bodies would fall into the opening. The chubby boy was among the first to be blasted into the ground below. The girl who had a red ore-like covering on her body could still move about unhindered by the sudden change in the gravitational force. Sway! Swee-eye! She dodged the cannons and dashed forward. She formed a 2-meter-long sickle made of red energy, and swung it towards the cannon in front of her. Shwai! The cannon was smoothly divided in two. Bang! 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 More participants were still being shot down. Nevertheless, some of the mixed bloods used others as coverings to prevent beams from touching them. They also attacked the cannons even though their speed was decreased significantly. In a few minutes, the 17 cannons had been destroyed. However, only 21 participants were left. After all the cannons were destroyed, the gravitational force returned back to normal. Let's go, Angie, Gustav said and proceeded to stand up. Angie was still amazed by what she had just witnessed. He wanted to use them as cannon folder. Was that why he chose to remain here? Thinking about it made chills run down her spine. Gustav never explained the reason for most of his actions, so she was left to speculate. She was partially right with her thinking. Since Gustav had a bloodline related to gravity, he already sensed that something weird up ahead. The cannons underneath the ground were barricaded by something that prevented Gustav's eyes from seeing through it. Despite the camouflage, he still sensed that it might be a bit dangerous. Gustav didn't want to reveal his strength this early, which was the main reason for his actions earlier. He just needed someone to head forward so he could measure the difficulty level of whatever challenge they were going to face. This just happened to be an unexpected bonus. Oh well, everything worked out just fine in the end, Gustav said while walking side by side with Angie. Some of the participants stared at him with a look of annoyance. You bastard, you knew about this but didn't tell us anything! One of them shouted out, just as Gustav and Angie caught up to them. Gustav, as usual, ignored them and kept walking forward with Angie. At this point, they were about 400 feet away from the base of the tower. They could now see the other participants heading towards the base of the tower from the different roads leading to it. As they closed in on the base of the tower, Gustav noticed that no doors were available. There was practically no entry point to get into the MBO tower. Gustav sensed something and quickly moved towards the right. Swee-eye! He felt an invisible force brush past his face. Bang! The invisible force slammed into the face of the person beside him. Kaya! Blood burst out of his face as he screamed in pain while being sent flying back by 40 feet. Bang! 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 3 other participants also had their bodies blasted backwards by invisible forces. Kairar! Kairar! Screams reverberated across the vicinity as the mixed bloods once again engaged forces that they couldn't see with their eyes. Swerve! 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 Gustav swerved sideways repeatedly like he was dancing. Angie also did the same while dashing forward. If a third party was to see them from afar, they would think this group of people had run mad, having no idea that they were currently battling with strange forces. For these unknown forces to be invisible, they must be at least level 5. Is the MBO trying to fail people on purpose? Gustav said while observing his surroundings. He was able to sense the form of the invisible force everyone was battling with. They had human forms. However, Gustav could sense power crystal energy coming from them, so he figured out that they were androids. Gustav suddenly descended, dodging the arm of an invisible AI. Clasp! He clenched his fist and threw it upwards as he ascended. Bang! He landed a solid hit on the invisible AI, causing it to be blasted into the air while moving backwards. Bam! 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 The AI slammed into 3 of its kind, creating a path in front for Gustav. On the side, Angie just finished blasting away an AI after dodging many of them. Swoosh! Swoosh! They both dashed towards the path that was created in front of them, leaving the rest behind. Good thing Angie was able to master the vibration technique I taught her, Gustav said internally as they moved towards the base of the tower together. Chapter 163. The girl with green skin who had red ore-like energy covering her body also managed to forge a path for herself, and dashed forward. About 15 more mixed bloods later managed to escape from the clutches of the invisible AIs. Similar situations were also playing out on the different roads that led to the tower. Other participants also had issues with fending off the AIs. Those that succeeded in evading the AIs dashed forward at full speed. Immediately they were within the range of 50 feet in getting to the tower's base. Glowing blue circles appeared on the ground around the tower. Truin! 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 More than 50 glowing circles suddenly appeared around the tower right in front of the participants close to reaching its base. Two of these suspicious-looking circles appeared several feet ahead of Gustav and Angie. "Angie, go into the circle!" Gustav shouted out. Swoosh! Swoosh! Both of them dashed towards the right and left circles simultaneously. Sing! Immediately they got into the circles. It glowed up intensely before disappearing along with the both of them. The girl behind them with green skin dashed towards the circle at the right side and entered it. Sing! She disappeared along with the circle, and only 14 of the participants were left within the vicinity. These participants had to struggle frantically with one another to enter a circle. Sing! Sing! Gustav and Angie found themselves inside a large white space. The ground, walls, and ceiling were colored white. The space was so large that the size could be compared to a large street. Both of them appeared on the south right corner of the space, and ahead of them, they could see several people seated. The seats were positioned in a circular format, and there happened to be a vast space in between. These were participants that had also been teleported here. There were about 60 of them, and they all had tense-looking faces. Even after seeing Gustav and Angie, they only stared for a few seconds before ignoring them. Gustav and Angie walked forward and found somewhere to sit. While they waited, other participants started appearing one after the other on the same spot they arrived. The batch Gustav and Angie were in also arrived after a while. As time passed, more and more participants appeared, and space was getting crowded little by little. Gustav! Angie called out to him as they waited. Gustav turned to face her. What happened back there? Why did we have to go through that? Angie asked with a look of confusion. That was probably the first phase of the test, Gustav said with a contemplative expression. First phase? Angie asked with a look of bewilderment. But the badge said registration was by 8 am. The test isn't supposed to start till then, she added. Angie, do you remember what I told you? Gustav asked while placing his jaw on his fist. To be ready for surprises? Angie said with a look of uncertainty. That's right. Prepare yourself for surprises. Let your mind be in an active state at all times, Gustav stated. In other words, we have to be alert at all times. On Angie's face, a determined look could be seen as she was in pensive thought. Ha ha ha, bunch of useless fools! I don't understand how these idiots couldn't even get into the tower! A tall and slim-looking young participant with spiky orange hair shouted out while laughing. He had just been teleported into the space a while ago. A wide grin was plastered on his face as he placed his hand behind his head and walked towards the rest of the participants. While walking and voicing out his disgust for those who failed to get to the tower, the other participants stared at him with weird looks. Huh! Why does this place look dead? He voiced out after noticing their stares. Toy! He spat out. Bunch of losers, see how they all look scared, he said as he proceeded to sit beside the green-skinned girl that came from Gustav's batch. Dash. You bastard, how dare you call us weak? Dash. You're the one who's weak, loudmouth. Dash. I'll cut that tongue off, some of the participants said. They were provoked by his words and voiced their anger, but he ignored them and put one of his fingers in his left ear. You don't look like those weaklings, he said with a grin to the girl beside him. Don't talk to me so casually, the green-skinned girl voiced out with a repressed look and proceeded to ignore him. Don't be so prideful, cos I acknowledge your strength, he shouted out. Go talk to the gutter, loudmouth, she replied and stood up. She moved to Gustav and Angie's position few feet towards the left and sat beside Gustav. Do you think you can get rid of me like that? The participant with spiky orange hair stood up and moved towards them. He sat down beside the girl again, and they started bantering. The space that was silent earlier became noisy due to this too. Idiots! A new participant with short stature and a cool look said while walking towards the sitting area. He had aqua-colored shoulder-length hair, and 2 red lines extending from his forehead to his left eyebrow. He found somewhere to sit and closed his eyes. TCH. The participant with spiky orange hair stared at the person who had just arrived with a wary look. Timmy, don't think you'll overshadow me in this test. He pointed at the participant that had just arrived while speaking. You're not even worth standing in my shadow, Ria, Timmy replied. Humph. We shall see. The participant with spiky orange hair voiced out. More and more participants continued to arrive. In about 30 minutes, their numbers exceeded 1,000, the total number of the people originally in the venue. It would seem that the banter between Ria and the green-skinned girl, along with the participant that later arrived, Timmy, made the tense atmosphere ease up a little. Chapter 164. The participants began to initiate conversations with one another. 1 hour 30 minutes later, Gustav sensed something and looked up. Troyan! A bright flash of light appeared in the middle of the space surrounding the participants. When the flash of light disappeared, a man in an orange-colored military-like jacket with black stripes could be seen standing there. He had beautiful yellow-colored long hair that reached his lower back. The large room instantly quietened upon noticing him. Welcome to the MBO Tower! I am Gradier Zanatus, the overseer of this batch's participants. The man voiced out with a solemn expression. You all should know why you're here. The MBO entrance test registration is going to begin in a few minutes. However, before it does, I'd like to say a few things. I'm sure you all are still confused about what happened on your way to the tower, he said with his hands placed behind his back. That was the beginning phase of the MBO entrance test put in place to test the participants' reaction to dangerous and sudden situations. Those that were unable to get to the tower failed the test and have been transported back to the facility, he narrated. Chatter. 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 The space became a little noisy after hearing that. The participants now had looks of understanding. Some of them already had a feeling that similar events were about to occur when they noticed that the officials in the vicinity didn't bother to help them when the grounds exploded. Gradier Zanatus' words confirmed their suspicions. Expect more surprises during the test. Things will not be as they are said to be because the only thing that never changes in this world is that things hardly ever go as planned. Those who can fully understand and adapt to that thought process will be able to handle unexpected situations. Only those who are good enough will stand the chance of getting enlisted into the MBO. So, make sure you do your best, he stated with an authoritative tone. Now the registration process shall begin, he voiced out before disappearing along with a flash of light. Truanyugle. 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 The floor in the middle of the room opened up, and several silver rectangular pillars emerged from them. These pillars had 2 palm prints on each of their bodies that glowed blue. Place your hand on the palm to confirm your identity and move on to the next stage. 1 plus 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 Y. The voice of the man who had just left echoed across the large space. The number of participants in the large space area was close to 2,000. Still, the pillars were only about 20 in number. Lights that form numbers begin to emit from each pillar. Gradier Zanatus once again explained that when a pillar showed the number on their palms, it would be their turn to touch the pillar and confirm their identity. 20 participants stood up from their seating positions and walked towards the pillar after seeing their number. They placed their hands on the palm print, and bright light enveloped them, scanning their body from head to toe. After a few had been selected and their palms had been scanned, the process was completed. The participants who had undergone the process disappeared from their standing position. Contrary to everyone's expectations, names, ranks, and bloodline grades of the participants were not displayed. For some reason, the MBO decided to not disclose this information even though they had it. The participants didn't know that the MBO wanted everyone to partake in the next test blindly, without having any idea of what their fellow participants' strength was. Gustav turned his palm around to face him and stared at the number on it again. 00126. The number of participants in this venue should be at least 10,000. How is it that only about 1,000 made it to this place? Gustav wondered. There are probably other places in the tower where participants were teleported to. After thinking about it for a while, he came to this conclusion. This place is really huge, so I'm sure it will be able to fit the 10,000 people. What could be MBO's reason for this separation? Gustav couldn't help but think the MBO was playing at something again. Although lots of participants had been disqualified during the first phase, there would definitely still be more than 1,000 left, and they could all fit in within this large space, but they were teleported to other places within the tower. Truant! Above one of the pillars on the left, the number on Gustav's palm was displayed. One participant was teleported a moment ago from that spot. Angie was still seated, waiting for her number to be shown. When she saw Gustav getting up, she felt a wave of uneasiness and disappointment hit her. She knew a time like this would eventually come when they would have to be separated during the test. Despite knowing that their separation was coming, she still wasn't happy about it. She could only try to do her possible best to get enlisted so she could accompany him. Good luck, Gustav, she voiced out with a smile. H&M. Gustav nodded while staring at her. Try your best, Gustav added before moving forward. I will, Angie muttered with a look of determination. Gustav walked majestically towards the second to the last pillar on the left side. His bearing and vibe of confidence, along with his handsome looks, dragged a lot of people's attention towards him. Especially the batch he came in with earlier. Some of them still had a grudge against him due to what happened earlier. However, at this moment, they could tell that his bearing wasn't that of an ordinary person. I wonder what grade he is. These were the thoughts of almost every mixed blood in the vicinity. Gustav arrived in front of the pillar and stretched out his hand to touch it. Truant! Lights reflected from the pillar and scanned his entire figure. In a few seconds he disappeared from his spot. Sing! Gustav's eyes regained its clarity after the blinding light disappeared, and he found himself in a different place. Chapter 165. After Gustav disappeared, Angie sat and waited for her turn. I hope I get teleported somewhere close to him, she said internally. After a few minutes more of waiting, it was her turn, and she proceeded to walk towards the front. Gustav walked around after arriving at the new place. Unlike the former space, this one had no walls. The entire space was white and bright except for the ground, which had patches of green grass on it. The space was vast, and it was impossible to see the beginning of the end since it extended as far as the eyes could see. In the air, a large holographic image of numbers counting down could be seen high above. 15:04. Gustav could tell that the next phase was probably going to begin after the holographic timer's countdown was complete. Gustav was sure that he wasn't the only participant in the space and that the others were probably too far apart for him to sense their presence. Hopefully, they'll give us a heads up on what the next phase is about, Gustav said internally and proceeded to sit on the ground. The past week's events drifted into his mind as he sat. After Boss Danzo left 6 weeks back, Gustav was enraged, and he promised to deal with the teachers in the disciplinary committee. He hatched plans and plotted some things secretly. Gustav didn't just want to do something that they could recover from easily. He wanted to get proof that will show that they had a hand in the incident. Gustav wanted solid evidence that will put the teachers in a precarious situation without him feeling any form of repression. Gustav impersonated a school cleaner and infiltrated all their offices one after the other to search for clues. There were about 4 teachers on the disciplinary committee, 3 men and 1 woman. Mr. Lon was the person who personally demanded that Gustav's workload should be increased. The rest were Mr. Butch, Mr. Sun, and Mrs. Grace. Gustav went into their offices one after the other to search for clues. After searching about 4 of their offices, Gustav couldn't find anything that linked to the incident. He entered Mr. Lon's office last to search for clues. However, like the others, he couldn't find anything. He even hacked their schedule tablet, but nothing critical came up. Gustav was about to leave when he noticed something on Mr. Lan's schedule tablet. The schedule tablet was a circular device where Mr. Lan's daily schedules were placed. Gustav had checked the schedule tablets of other teachers from the disciplinary committee. Still, he couldn't find a lead of any sort. By contrast, something on Mr. Lan's tablet caught his attention. Delta Labs? Gustav voiced out what he saw on the schedule tablet. On the tablet, it was displayed that Mr. Lan had some kind of appointment in a certain lab the next day. This particular lab caught his attention because this was one of the labs that Gustav sold corpses of mixed breeds to. The location wasn't far from his neighborhood, and it happened to be a lower-rated lab compared to the other labs in the city. Gustav began to wonder why Mr. Lan would want to visit such a lab that wasn't befitting of his standard. Gustav was also supposed to visit the lab the next day to sell some mixed-breed corpses. It was the perfect opportunity for him to see what Mr. Lan was up to. Flicker. Gustav opened his eyes after hearing a beeping sound within the space. 03:59. He looked up and noticed that the time left was less than 4 minutes already. The holographic projection of the timer displayed had turned red, and the beeping sound increased the tension in the hearts of the participants. "Welcome once again, everyone!" A loud voice boomed across the space. Every participant in different parts of the space could hear the voice. "This is Gradier Zenatus speaking. The second phase of the entrance test shall begin in a few minutes," he added with a vibrant tone. "This phase is based on a single skill." Gradier Zenatus paused for a few seconds, causing the tension in the air to rise. "Endurance," he said with a loud voice. "Oh," Gustav said. He expected this phase to be more complex, but it turned out to be an endurance test. "Now, I will brief you on this phase," Gradier Zenatus said before proceeding to explain what was required to pass the test. "You only need to do one thing during the duration of the test. Follow the light." Follow the light? Everyone was dumbfounded at his statement. They only needed to follow a light to pass the test? No matter how they tried seeing it, it seemed very simple to them. "This is definitely not going to be as simple as he says," Gustav said internally upon hearing Gradier Zenatus' words. Gustav wasn't the only participant who had this thought. Some of them remembered the ordeal they went through while trying to get to the tower. This made them raise their guards up because they felt that the test might not be as simple as it was being made out to be. Gradier Zenatus explained some other things for a few more minutes. 00:30. When only 30 seconds were left on the holographic timer, Gradier Zenatus ended his briefing and wished all the participants good luck before his voice disappeared. After his voice disappeared, a massive ball of green light appeared in the distance. It looked so far away, but everyone could see it clearly. Nobody needed to be reminded that the light was what they needed to follow because, according to Gradier Zenatus' words, they had to keep moving until they got to the light. Also, Gradier Zenatus mentioned a hidden scoreboard where participants would receive points based on their performances during each test phase. This hidden scoreboard would not be revealed until the end of the MBO entrance test, 00:19. Chapter 166. This hidden scoreboard would not be revealed until the end of the MBO entrance test. 00:19. Everyone looked ready from their various positions. They stared at the green ball of light ahead with a look of determination. God Eyes has been activated. Gustav stared at the ball of light from his position but couldn't find any energy points on them, which surprised him a little. Even when he tried zooming in on sighting the ball of light, it was still extremely far away from his current position. The distance must be the reason why I can't see its energy points. From the previous rumors I heard, the MBO entrance test takes longer than a day to be finished. If the rumors are true, it might take more than a day to get to the light. Is this why this is an endurance test? Gustav wondered as he stared at the countdown. 00:03, 00:02, 00:01, 00:00. Second phase will now commence. Immediately the countdown was up, everyone started racing towards the green ball of light. Some conserved their energy, and moved at a fair pace because they remembered Gradier's Anatus mentioning that the test was related to endurance. They had no idea of the situations they would be facing. To be on the safe side, they decided to conserve their energy for any unforeseen circumstances that may arise. Some felt that getting to the light first would be good because of the hidden scoreboard that was mentioned by Gradier's Anatus. They were sure that being the first to get to the light would give them a good number of points. Gustav stood in the same position after the countdown had started and looked around. I still can't use my full abilities because there are invisible cameras everywhere. They must be watching from a secret room or something. It's not the time to reveal any of my abilities even though they probably know my grade by now, Gustav said and proceeded to squat slightly. Thwum! He dashed forward with speed, crossing over 200 feet in a single body movement. Gustav was currently moving at his average speed. However, his speed was still much faster than many mixed bloods taking part in the test. His hair blew backward as his body traveled with speed across the patch of grass. Floor 617, Watchroom. Inside the room filled with screens that displayed different participants within the white space, Gradier's Anatus stood in front as usual. They watched as the participants moved towards the light. There are some really promising candidates with unique bloodlines this year. His eyes moved from place to place across the screens. One of the participants with electric green scales on his face zapped across the place in a particular screen, moving at a fair pace. His movement was like teleportation. Electricity would appear several feet in front of him, and he would transform into it. This kept happening throughout. He can move faster, but he seems to be one of those conserving their energy, Gradier's Anatus thought. Bring up the information on this participant, Gradier's Anatus voiced out while pointing at that part of the screen. One of the officials behind nodded and tapped on the holographic keyboards several times. Truin! A new holographic screen appeared out of thin air in front of Gradier's Anatus. He stared at the information and nodded. B-grade, not bad, he said internally and proceeded to wave his hand. The holographic screens disappeared, and he stared at the other screens. On another screen, he noticed a short girl with black ram horns and the lower part of a serpent squirming across the ground with speed. As she was moving across the ground, the green patches of grass were turning into a trail of ashes with the outline of her body displayed on it. Her bloodline ability doesn't make her very mobile, but there's a chance that she might surprise us when the real challenges come. Inside the room, a large number of screens that were over 1,000 showed all the participants' movement. Despite the number of screens, Gradier's Anatus was able to watch every single one of them at the same time and notice the promising participants. These three are really good too, Gradier's Anatus commented and had 3 enlarged holographic screens appear in front of him. The first one was a 5-foot-tall boy with achy-colored shoulder-length hair and 2 red lines extending from his forehead to his left eyebrow. He was moving across the patch of grass with intense speed, causing a red streak to blaze across the place. Although his bloodline had not been revealed yet, Gradier's Anatus felt he was promising enough from what he had seen. The second was a green-skinned girl with a brown whip-like tail that had red ore-like energy cover her entire body. She was currently on a red 4-feet sickle made out of energy. The sickle flew above the patch of grasses, giving her enough mobility to move as she pleased. The third person on the screen was a tall boy with spiky orange hair. Surprisingly, this boy wasn't walking or running above the plain fields like everyone else. Instead, he was moving underground. How he arrived underneath the ground was unknown, but he stood in one spot and folded his arms with a wide grin on his face. The ground was moving him forward without him having to do anything. This 3 should be the most promising candidates here except for that boy that led the other batch here. His information shows that his bloodline has something to do with transformation. Still, he hasn't made use of that, Gradier's Anatus said while staring forward with a look of contemplation. I guess we shall soon see how they perform when they meet the first challenges, he said internally while waving his hand. The participants kept moving towards the green ball of light for the next 3 hours. Some of them noticed that the ball wasn't getting any closer even after increasing their speed. They had been expecting some kind of challenge, but even after moving for another hour, nothing happened. Some of them were already running out of stamina after 6 hours passed by. The green ball of light was still very far away. Some of them decided to rest while others kept moving forward. Looks like some of them have let down their guards now, Gradier Xanatus said internally while watching the participants on the screens. Release the mobicles, he commanded with a loud voice. Chapter 167. It looks like some of them have let down their guard, Gradier Xanatus said internally while watching the participants on the screens. Release the mobicles, he commanded with a loud voice. Within the test location, the participants suddenly paused whatever they were doing when they sensed something. VRRMMMM. VRRMMMM. VRRMMM. Openings were formed high above the ground. It looked like the space was torn open, forming circular blue tunnels in the air. Swee-eye. 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 Baby palm-sized blue machines started raining down from above. These small machines were spherical and had very smooth surfaces. Thousands of them were dropping from the sky. Everyone was surprised at the sudden development. The group of participants that sat down to rest were about to jump to their feet when the ground started quaking. DHMMM. GHRMMM. Most mixed bloods lost their footing, but surprisingly they didn't fall. They didn't fall because the grass below their feet had grown in length and coiled around their legs without most participants realizing what was going on. When this was happening, some participants noticed it and found a way to protect themselves while others didn't. The participants that the plants grabbed made use of their bloodline abilities to free themselves from the grip of the plants. However, in the process of doing that, the weird spherical machines falling from above made contact with the ground. SKRYHH. The ground split open in different places. Immediately contact was made. Kairar! Screams rang out as several participants fell into the openings on the ground after they finished escaping from the entanglement of the plants. Some were unable to free themselves from the entanglement and were thrown into the plants' openings. Due to the unique chain of events, more mixed bloods were disqualified at this point. Those who could escape the cracks and opening points on the floor moved to a safer spot. They stared at the landscape ahead with a look of bewilderment. The spherical machines glowed green before burrowing into the ground and disappearing. Right before their very eyes, the structure of the entire landscape started changing. Small golden-colored rivers began to appear ahead, along with mountains and trees. Some grass patches became bigger and taller. The grasses with sentience started thrashing around, all in a bid to grab the nearby participants. A sky also suddenly appeared high above. The participants could see clouds with their blue color, but the yellow sun was missing. In place of the sun, the participants could only see the green ball of light they were supposed to follow. Everything in the space looked so real that it could be compared to normal outdoors. The only differences that the participants could spot were the golden rivers and the green ball of light that replaced the sun. The outlook of the entire landscape had gone through an unbelievable transformation. I knew getting to the blue light wasn't going to be as easy as they were making it out to be, Gustav muttered while observing his surroundings. He stood at the top of a small 30-meter-tall rock and stared at the landscape ahead while activating God's eyes. The changes were caused by those machines. Such immense energy. Able to transform the environment to whatever the MBO wishes for it to be, Gustav said as he furrowed his eyebrows. The rock he was currently standing on wasn't there at first. It also came into existence after the spherical machines rained down from the sky. Gustav was also surrounded by plants that tried to hold him down, but he destroyed them easily. When the rock sprouted out of the ground, he leaped onto it to check the vicinity from a higher point. He was able to see the high amount of energy points each machine had, and he determined after an observation that the little machines caused the change. It looks like it was not only the surface structure that changed. Things just got a little more interesting, Gustav said with a smile on his face. Several thousand meters ahead of his standing point, Gustav could see a small forest that had blue and yellow trees. What a good cover-up, Gustav said while staring ahead. They were still very far from his position, but he was able to see the trees and what awaited within. Gustav jumped down from the rock and dashed forward with speed. He had no intention of avoiding the forest. If Gustav wanted to travel around the forest, he would have to turn left or right, but since the start of the second phase, he hadn't changed trajectory as everyone did. Everyone traveled in a straight line because they felt that changing trajectory would increase the time it would take for them to reach the green ball of light. Gustav felt that everyone was probably transported to positions where they only had to keep moving forward to get to the ball. Turning towards the left or right would mean you were traveling in the wrong direction, but that didn't mean you couldn't get back on track by simply turning to face the large glowing ball in the distance. Swoosh! Gustav arrived within the forest in a few seconds and streaked past the yellow and blue trees. The forest was so dense that the leaves from different trees formed large canopies that covered the entire region, causing the vicinity to look dark blue and yellow due to the color of the trees. Shwai! A circular blade with numerous spikes on its edges suddenly flew across the air towards Gustav's chest from up a tree 13 feet away. Due to the number of leaves covering the tree, this blade was well concealed and wouldn't be noticed until it was about 3 feet away from making contact. Swerve! Gustav moved his body towards the side. Immediately the blade was sent out, dodging it with ease. As the blade traveled past him, it was in fairly slow motion from his point of view. He could see it clearly as it traveled forward. It was as big as a person's head, blue with a yellow light beeping on its surface. Gustav stretched out his hand and grabbed the blade, hindering its movement. Grip! His strong grip on the blade stopped its spinning immediately. Gustav quickly spun around and flung the blade back to the direction it was sent from. Chapter 168. His firm grip on the blade stopped its spinning immediately. Gustav quickly spun around and flung the blade back in the direction it was sent. Skkrhhh. A loud metallic screeching sound rang out from up ahead. Boom! A small explosion rocked the trees a few feet ahead. A big branch of a tree was severed in two, and it fell to the ground along with a blue humanoid-looking machine. The left shoulder area down to the chest and the sides of its rib melted off. Gustav dashed out in a bid to finish it off the moment it landed on the ground. However, the instant he moved forward, he heard the sound of air being sliced apart due to objects moving at high speed across it. Gustav turned around and noticed 3 out of 4 similar-looking blades heading towards him from the left, right and center. Tum! Gustav immediately leaped upwards to dodge all the projectiles. As his body ascended into the air, the spinning blades passed below him, but to his surprise, they stopped moving forward. The blades turned and headed for his body while he was still in midair. Gustav noticed another one headed for him from behind, bringing the total count of the blades to 5. Swirl! Gustav suddenly spun his body repeatedly in midair and swung out his leg towards the first 3 blades that arrived in front of him. Bam! 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 Gustav's leg accurately slammed into the body of the 3 blades. His leg made contact with the surface of the blades, sending them flying into the distance again. As they moved through the air, several branches were cleaved in 2 before the blades embedded themselves into 3 different trees up ahead. Due to the swinging of his leg, his body still spun towards the back, and he reached out his hand to grab the remaining 2 blades flying towards him. Clench! Clench! He landed with both blades in his hands and wanted to swing them out again when he noticed the blinking of yellow lights speed up. Beep! Beep! Boom! Both of them exploded together, causing a radius of over 16 feet to be engulfed in fire. Smoke spread across the environment, but the silhouettes of 5 humanoid-looking blue machines could be seen walking towards the point of explosion. They had glowing yellow lines on their arms and looked menacing. Earlier on, their arms had been stretched out towards Gustav's position. Still, after the explosion, they didn't seem to be on guard anymore. Scanning environment for signs of life. A robotic voice was heard from one of them as rays of red and green light in the form of a net shot out. But immediately that happened, a silhouette dashed out of the smoke towards it. Signs of life, dis. Before the robotic voice could complete its sentence, a tightly clenched fist drilled into the middle of its chest. KRRYYCCHH. A small circular object blasted out from the back of the hole created in the machine's chest. Troyan. The glowing lines on its body dimmed immediately. The smoke cleared up, and Gustav's straight-looking face was revealed. He neither had injuries, nor did he look ruffled in any way. Swoosh! Gustav withdrew his fist from the chest of the humanoid machine and dashed towards the left, dodging a green energy beam that was shot towards him from behind. He arched his arm backwards as he arrived in front of the humanoid machine on the left and threw it upwards. Bang! His fist collided with its jaw, causing it to be flung into the air. Gustav didn't wait for a single second before swinging out his fist repeatedly. Bam! 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 While still being suspended in midair, Gustav's fist rained down upon the body of the humanoid machine, blasting apart several of its metallic body parts. Bang! The humanoid machine slammed into a tree on the other side, causing its body to break into bits and pieces. Gustav had already dashed towards the side again after successfully launching that attack. Swerve! 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 Gustav was moving at 200 feet per second, so dodging the shots of the humanoid machines was really easy for him. His body moved across the place in a zigzag manner. He arrived in front of another humanoid machine and rained down barrages of punches on it. Bam! 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 In about a minute, Gustav was done dealing with every single humanoid except for the first one. All the A's that fought with Gustav either lost one of their body parts or had their cores taken from their body, so their functions had shut down. Gustav gathered the cores and placed them in his storage device. Extra energy is always appreciated, he said internally as he walked towards the AI he didn't finish off. Participant 00126 can proceed. A robotic voice boomed out from the AI that Gustav hadn't killed. Gustav nodded and dashed forward while throwing his arm out. Bang! His arm tore through the chest of the AI, and he grabbed onto its core before pulling it out with force. I won't pass up on free energy, he said internally as the glow on the AI's body dimmed as it fell to the ground. When the system absorbs the cores, the energy needed for the next upgrade will be reduced to a quarter, Gustav thought while storing the core in his storage device. Swoosh! He dashed forward after all was said and done, leaving the AIs in scraps. Gustav leaped to the top of a tree and started jumping from tree to tree after crossing a distance of 700 feet. Floor 617, Watchroom. Gradier Xanatus stared at a particular screen at the top left corner of the holographic split screens. His eyes were laced with a look of disbelief and uncertainty. Did that candidate just casually deal with a bunch of level 6 AIs without even activating his bloodline? The shock in his voice was evident. Chapter 169. Did that candidate just casually deal with a bunch of level 6 AIs without even activating his bloodline? The shock in his voice was evident. He stared at other holographic screens, trying to see if he missed any other candidate that may have displayed the same prowess Gustav did. However, after checking for a long time, he couldn't find anything of sorts. Most participants on the screen were struggling to deal with the AIs with their bloodline being activated. Contrary to other participants, Gustav dealt with 5 AIs by only using brute force. Level 6 AIs were comparable to Step 2 Zulu rank mixed bloods. So, it was understandable that the mixed bloods were having problems defeating them. Although, most mixed bloods participating had surpassed the Step 2 rank. Still, it would be challenging to defeat multiple level 6 AIs within a specific period without taking damage. According to the scans, his bloodline should be related to transformation. How is he able to use this level of strength without transforming? Gradier Xanatus thought. Bring up the information on that candidate. Gradier Xanatus pointed at the screen that showed Gustav dashing across the forest. Truan! Another holographic screen appeared in front of him that displayed Gustav's personal information. His name, address, date of birth, and so many other things were displayed. Gustav Crimson. Gradier Xanatus muttered with a weird look on his face, wondering why something about this name felt familiar to him. His eyes suddenly widened as he noticed a piece of information. His birth parents are the Oslavs? He voiced out with a look of disbelief and confusion. Another prodigy from the Oslav family. Do they have 3 kids? Because Endrick's big brother was said to have a low-grade bloodline. I wonder why this one didn't catch the eyes of the inspectors. A mixed blood of this caliber should have passed the special test. Gradier Xanatus thought while being puzzled at the new information he uncovered. Why does he bear the name Crimson, if his original family is the Oslavs? A giant screen was placed in front of a hall, and several young people dressed in pure white uniform-like outfits sat on chairs opposite the screen. Most of these youngsters gave off a confident and prideful vibe as they all watched the screen in front with contemplative looks. A glass wall could be seen on the right side of the hall. Through the glass wall, clouds could be seen, which depicted that the current altitude of this location was very high. On the front seat, a boy with curly black hair dressed like the others sat with his legs crossed. Among all the others, he seemed to be the youngest because of his looks. He had a conflicted look on his face as he stared at the screen ahead. What's the problem, Endrick? You've been acting weird since we arrived at the hall. Are you sick? A girl with long blonde hair beside him voiced out with a concerned look on her face while stretching out her hand to touch his face. Pa! Don't touch me! He voiced out with a repressed look while slapping her hand away from his face. She withdrew her hand immediately but still kept facing him. Endrick kept gritting his teeth as he stared at a particular part of the screen. She noticed this and followed his line of sight to check out what he was staring at. On a particular part of the screen, a tall boy with dirty blonde hair had just exited a small forest and was now headed towards the mountain pass up ahead. Why do you two look so identical? She asked with a suspicious gaze. None of your bus. Before Endrick could complete his sentence, someone interrupted from the side. Isn't that your big brother? A boy sporting short brown hair asked while pointing at the screen. Endrick's big brother? The girl voiced out with a surprised look and turned back to stare at the screen. No wonder, she said internally. What do you mean by big brother? Endrick's face suddenly twisted in rage as he stared at the person on his right-hand side. The space around Endrick suddenly warped and twisted. Ugh! The boy beside him suddenly fell to the ground on his knees. What are you doing? He stuttered while asking as his body trembled. Other people in the hall were confounded by the sudden turn of events and stared at the front with a dumbfounded look. He is no brother of mine! Endrick voiced out loudly, causing the space to twist even more. The boy felt heavy pressure descend upon him, causing his entire body to be forcefully pinned to the ground. Plop! Endrick, stop it! The girl on his left voiced out. Shut up! Just because you managed to pass the special test doesn't mean you're on the same level with me. Endrick voiced out with a prideful look, causing the girl to flinch back, speechless. He turned to face the boy who was struggling to move on the ground. Watch your words next time, fool! He said before turning around to leave the hall. The boy on the ground felt the air return to normal, and his body lightened up again. He slowly stood up while gasping for breath with a look of embarrassment visible on his face. Chatter. 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 Dash. TCH, he's so full of pride at such a young age. Dash. He is a special class, that's to be expected. Dash. None of the special class showed up here to watch the test except for him. Dash. I can't believe he has a brother. The silent hall became a little noisy after what had happened. The girl who tried stopping Endrick earlier helped the other boy up. I can't believe Endrick did that to me. I was his senior for years, he voiced out after sitting down. Gerg, don't be mad at him, she said with a pleading look. You're always supporting him, Paula, yet he treated you like shit, Gerg said with a look of pity. I don't, she stuttered, not knowing what to say. Chapter 170. Gerg, don't be mad at him, she said with a pleading look. You're always supporting him, Paula, yet he treated you like shit, Gerg said with a look of pity on his face. I don't. She stuttered, not knowing what to say. I can't believe Gustav is participating in the test. He seems to be doing well also. What's going on? Gerg asked while staring at the screen. Endrik stood on a corridor with a sliding floor surface. The floor was moving him forward across the corridor. This time, Gustav, I promised to finish you off for the humiliation you brought me, he said internally with a look of rage. 8 hours had already gone by since the second phase of the test started. The participants were still following the green light, which looked as far as ever. However, those that had traveled farther than others could tell that they had closed the distance a little. More than 100 participants had been eliminated by AIs that suddenly spawned all around the place. Another thing was, the AIs within each area were different. To pass a particular location, a participant would have to go through one trouble or the other. Nevertheless, whenever they managed to surpass such obstacles and travel past that region successfully, they would notice a specific change. The green ball of light had become a little closer than it was earlier. In a region of large mountains, Gustav was currently running along a mountain pass. The current mountain Gustav scaled through was huge, and on the right side, the mountain pass was located. At the edge, several spiky large bones could be seen at the bottom, pointing upwards. The large spiky bones were lined up at the bottom of the mountain, densely packed together. If one was to fall off the edge of the mountain pass, they would meet with a disastrous end. The mountain pass was about 16 feet wide. Gustav ran across the mountain pass with his eyes glowing a bright green and scarlet color. He furrowed his eyebrows as he noticed something 900 feet away. Swoosh! He crossed over 700 feet in about 3 seconds and leaped upwards once he crossed 800 feet. Thump! His body was lifted into the air by more than 100 feet while moving forward like a rocket. Bam! He landed several hundred feet ahead and kept running forward. Thanks to God eyes, I have avoided many traps within this mountain pass, Gustav said internally while running. When he first got to the mountain pass after moving through the forest, he activated a trap mechanism by mistake. He was nearly pushed to the bottom of the mountain because of that error. Since then, he had been making use of God eyes while passing through. He had been running for about 2 hours and had successfully crossed 3 mountain ranges. His energy was depleting at a fast rate due to the continuous use of God's eyes. Still, he wanted to make sure he crossed the mountain region before deactivating it. Gustav could already see the end of this mountain pass from his current location. One more mountain region to go, Gustav said internally. He could already see the next mountain in the distance, which was way taller than the mountain he was currently scaling through. I wonder if it will also get dark in this artificial space when the day comes to an end, Gustav said internally as he kept traveling forward. He could tell that it was getting close to evening in the real world. Just as he had guessed, the test was going to take more than a day. After a few more minutes of running, Gustav was closing in on the end of the mountain pass when he noticed something again. Bura, massive boulders suddenly started rolling down from the top left area of the mountain with intense speed. Unlike the last time he encountered a trap, his reaction time was slow because he didn't activate the current trap. More than 30 of them, each the size of a truck, rolled down with intensity, causing tremors across the mountain range. Parts of the mountain crumbled and slid down the mountain pass. Due to the intense vibrations the large boulders generated as they rolled down, Gustav's speed was affected slightly. The boulders were all rolling down simultaneously, but the first one was about 100 feet away from Gustav, while the last one was more than 6,000 feet away. The boulders were over 30 in number. Their sheer sizes were more than enough to destroy the path ahead and hinder Gustav's progress. Sprint has been activated. Gustav activated Sprint, and his speed instantly doubled. The boulders rolling down decreased in speed from his point of view as he threw his body forward with force. Whoosh! After images were created from his body movement as he crossed over 500 feet in a second, surpassing the first 7 boulders before they smashed into the route behind him. In the next second, he crossed 1,000 feet. The 13 boulders left in front of him were several feet away from making contact with the mountain pass ahead. Gustav's eyebrows furrowed as he leaped upwards and landed on top of the boulder 70 feet away from him. Tum! He pushed his knees upwards the instant he landed on it, propelling his body forward once again. Bang! Due to the force his legs generated, the upper part of the boulder blasted apart as Gustav leaped off it. Gustav's body traveled in midair, leaping past 7 more boulders. He dodged a particular one that nearly slammed into his head since it was still rolling down from above. Unfortunately, as Gustav's momentum was coming to an end, the last 5 boulders were already making contact with the mountain pass ahead. Gustav landed back on the route the same time the 5 boulders ahead smashed into the mountain pass. Boom! 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 It sounded like a nuclear explosion as the boulders slammed vigorously into the road ahead. Chapter 171. Boom! 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 It sounded like a nuclear explosion as the boulders slammed vigorously into the road ahead. Cracks appeared all over the path ahead as it crumbled and started sliding down the mountain. Over 1,000 feet of the mountain pass ahead was destroyed, leaving a large gap. Nevertheless, Gustav kept on running. Immediately he got to the edge where the route stopped. He bent his knees slightly with intense force. Super jump has been activated. Thumb! Gustav pushed himself upwards with force. Swee-eye! His body traveled forward above the wide gap formed from the destruction of the mountain pass. He could see the pointy bone-like objects below him as his body traveled in an arc through the air. Zwunnen! He successfully leaped over the 1,000-feet gap and landed at the other side of the mountain pass. Thumb! His feet made contact with the ground a few feet away from the edge behind him. Gustav raised his body back up with a straight face after landing on the other side. Good thing I was able to get super jump to increase in level, Gustav said internally as he turned around to look back. It was indeed an intimidating sight. The entire mountain pass, as far as the eyes could see, had been destroyed by the large boulders that rained down a few moments ago. Looking down, the deep crater could bring about the fear of death. However, Gustav was not scared of looking at the bottom that was currently more than 10,000 feet away. If someone couldn't fly, they had to either jump or walk across the straight surface of the mountain on the left. Jumping was impossible because there was now a gap of over 7,000 feet. Only a mixed blood that could walk on walls could cross the area as a last resort. What would happen if I had fallen? Would the MBO let the participants get killed when they failed to surpass a particular region? Gustav wondered whether the MBO had a way of preventing deaths when participants failed to overcome dangerous situations. He decided not to overthink it and turned around to keep walking. The end of this particular mountain pass was only a few feet away. After passing through the current mountain pass, he would only need to overcome one more mountain before traveling beyond this mountain region. In a few seconds, Gustav had gotten down from the mountain and was heading towards the next. Gustav stood in front of the 6,000-meter-tall mountain with greenish and yellow flowers surrounding the outward structure. There was another mountain on the left and right side, but those were way taller than this particular one, so Gustav decided to pick this. One question kept on nagging at Gustav's mind. Why do none of the mountains ahead have a pass? Gustav wondered with a look of suspicion. In another part of the space, a girl could be seen sprinting across the surface of a golden-colored stream. Zwee-eye! Her speed caused the surface of the stream to split open as she glided across it, forming line waves behind her. Her silver and pink hair blew backward as she dashed forward with gracefulness. She had 2 small white horns protruding from her forehead. Even with those horns on her beautiful face, she gave off a gentle vibe. Roar! A large black creature suddenly shot out of the stream behind. Its gigantic body blotted out a large part of the stream up ahead, casting a big shadow on the horned girl. The creature's head looked like an upside-down triangle, and it had golden scales on its 7 fins that were shaped like wings of airplanes. It's still chasing, she said internally without looking back. The girl, who was obviously Angie, already knew that she was being chased by this creature from the onset. Almost there, her sight was still focused on the end of the stream in the distance. Swoosh! Her body movement increased in speed for a few seconds, causing the water creature in the air to fall back into the stream, causing waves to splatter across the entire place. Due to the large body of the creature, the waves that spread across the rifts upset the balance of the stream's surface, throwing Angie into the air. Angie's body ascended by over 130 feet into the air. She flipped her body forward while still in midair. She then positioned it in such a way that when her rising momentum stopped, she will descend in a vertical format. Shroom! While Angie was descending from the air, the gigantic water creature suddenly sprouted out of the stream again with its mouth wide open. Its big pointy teeth that looked like sharp unbreakable swords were revealed. Angie was directly falling into the gaps within its teeth. Just as her body descended to the point where she was close to entering into its mouth, Angie spread her legs. Clum! Clam! The sole of her right and left foot missed several teeth pointed upwards. They directly landed on two teeth positioned in a horizontal format. She was able to find her footing within its mouth because of the creature's teeth position. Groof! Hot breath and streams of water blew out of the creature's mouth as it growled. Angie felt the intense heat blow her hair upwards, and her entire body was drowned in water mixed with the creature's stomach juices. The creature started closing up its mouth after making that growl. Angie's legs suddenly started vibrating at a crazy speed as she squatted and leaped upwards. Swoosh! Before the jaws of the creature could close up completely, her body flew out of the tiny gap left. Bomb! The creature's mouth closed up with intensity, causing the air to tremble quickly, generating loud sound waves. To the creature's disappointment, it only managed to eat air. Bones were not crushed like it expected. It looked forward and noticed the humanoid-looking girl running across the water again. Groof! It growled in anger. Disappointed by its fruitless efforts, the creature dived into the water again to give a chase to the puny-looking creature that managed to escape its grasp. Chapter 172. It growled in anger. Disappointed by its fruitless efforts, the creature dived into the water again to give a chase to the puny-looking creature that it managed to grasp. Splash! Zwunnen! It became angrier when it noticed she was close to reaching land. The creature chased after Angie furiously, but its attempts were in vain. Angie successfully reached the land ahead and kept on dashing forward for over 300 feet before coming to a stop. Groof! The creature burst out of the stream and arrived at the shore. It stared at the creature on land far ahead with a disappointed look before turning around and diving back into the water. Angie stared back at the stream area as the creature swam away. She let out a sigh of relief as her legs gave way, and she fell to the ground. She had been running across these golden-colored streams for the past few hours and was nearly worn out. She had encountered many creatures similar to the one she just escaped from. Whenever she crossed the golden stream, she would only be able to traverse on a small patch of land before meeting another stream ahead. She had crossed a total of 13 streams during this period, and the one she just crossed was the last one within the vicinity. What could be seen ahead was a plain field. Angie rested for a while before standing up. I must not relent. I'm sure he must still be moving forward even in the face of difficulties, she said with a look of determination written all over her face before dashing forward. Swoosh! Floor 617, watchroom, magnificent speed and reflexes. The highest so far, and from her data, her bloodline is related to speed. However, there's nothing special about speed since all mixed bloods get an upgrade in physical fitness. If this is all she can offer, then I'm afraid it's not gonna be good enough. Nevertheless, she shows a lot of promise, so I'm going to keep observing her, Gradier Xanatus said internally as he stared at the part of the screen that showed Angie. He turned his face away and stared at another part of the screen that showed a boy with dirty blonde hair climbing a huge mountain top with his bare hands. Gradier Xanatus remembered seeing Gustav's performance when he passed through the previous mountain range, even with the number of boulders he triggered. This boy from the Oslov family. He really is a hidden talent. The higher-ups must have noticed him as well as the others by now. If he keeps this up, he might get chosen. Gradius Anatus wasn't the only one that was wowed by Gustav's performance so far. Even the youngsters that passed the special test watched with a look of awe. Some of them started comparing Gustav to themselves, wondering if they'll be able to do the same. Most of them concluded that they would probably be delayed for a few minutes before they were able to cross the destroyed mountain pass. In another 4 hours, participants all across the test space were starting to slow down because the sky was already turning dark. They realized that the sky in here must mimic the original sky, and the darkening means that the day was coming to an end. Those that hadn't been disqualified yet could see that the green ball of light was now bigger, and it signified that they were getting closer. Still, they knew it would probably take another day of traveling before they could get to the ball of light because it still looked far. At this moment, it dawned on everyone who didn't realize it earlier that they would be spending more than a day within the test space. So, they would have to find food and water themselves. The candidates began to search for food and water. To their disappointment, finding food and water was almost impossible. The food was either from small fruits growing on a tree which would never be enough to quench their current hunger, while the water had tasted since it was from the golden-colored rivers. A lot of participants were going to sleep with empty stomachs since they couldn't even find any food or water source within their vicinity. Now they truly understood why this phase was called an endurance phase. Gustav found himself a nice shed underneath a big tree positioned beside a narrow river that led towards the east. It was already dark, and he had successfully gone through the mountain region a few hours back. His plan was to stay underneath the shade for the night. He was in an area that had a plain field and long rivers. He had crossed several rivers already. Gustav leaned his back against the tree and stared at the green ball of light in the distance. There was neither a sun nor a moon in the space. The green ball supplemented for them both, and it was bright enough at day and night. It should take me about half a day or close to an entire day more to get there. I could move during the night, close the gap even more, but I should replenish my energy right now. It would be risky if I fall into traps while traveling during the night, and I'm unable to get out of them due to lack of energy. Gustav muttered while staring at his energy points. Energy, 390/3200. He noticed that he had spent lots of energy points, and would probably spend just as much the next day. On the bright side, I might be able to complete my dinner here while following the light, Gustav thought, and proceeded to bring something out of his storage device. Zing! A large oven-like piece of equipment appeared in front of Gustav with a bright flash of blue light. This rectangular-shaped device was the same Gustav stored food to carry with him wherever he was headed. "Good thing I brought my homemade delicacies with me," he said with a look of delight while proceeding to open up the food-storing equipment. Chapter 173. This rectangular-shaped device was the same Gustav stored food to carry with him wherever he was headed. "Good thing I brought my homemade delicacies with me," he said with a look of delight while proceeding to open up the food-storing equipment. SSHHHSSS. A small cloud of smoke wafted out of the oven-like equipment, causing a delicious aroma to spread across the entire area. Gustav breathed in the aroma of the dishes and smiled. He proceeded to bring out one dish after the other and arrange them in front of him. The number of dishes in front of him would be enough to satisfy a family of 4. However, Gustav was a big eater, so this was nothing for him. Fried fox chick, roasted mutated devil's duck, boiled black rice. I forgot the volcanic blue prawn, Gustav said after noticing that one of his dishes was missing after counting them one after the other. He still left food within the food storage equipment, since he didn't want to finish everything at once in case some issues came up. "I can make do with these ones," Gustav said while proceeding to tear out a large piece of fried fox chick. The piece he tore out was as large as an adult's palm. Still, Gustav was able to shove the entire thing into his mouth. Crunch! 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 His cheeks bloated up as he munched on the delicious meal with a delightful expression. Within the watchroom, Gradius Anatus watched as the participants scrounged for food. Some of the participants were already out of energy after running for an entire day without eating. So, they just sat there looking lifeless. Gradier Xanatus shook his head as he saw that many participants were in similar situations. He suddenly noticed a part of the screen where someone was munching away a pile of delicacies. In contrast, others had already resigned themselves to the fate of starving for the night. What in the... Gradier Xanatus was speechless seeing Gustav casually munching away without a care in the world. That kid brought a food regulator with him? Gradier Xanatus saw the kitchen equipment in front of Gustav. The participants were allowed to take their storage devices with them during the test. Even if they decided to use enhancement pills hidden within their storage devices, the MBO wouldn't disqualify them for that reason. This is an endurance test. Bloodline enhancement drugs generate side effects after usage. Whenever a mixed blood uses bloodline enhancement drugs, they would be weak and unable to use their bloodline abilities properly for a day or two. The changes differ depending on the mixed blood's body structure. So, the MBO wasn't really against it for this and many other reasons. Only someone who wanted to handicap themselves would decide to make use of such drugs. What the MBO didn't think of was that one of the participants would be crazy enough to bring storage cooking equipment. Even if there was no food in it, he could prepare food with the resources in the environment. This was something unprecedented that Gradier Xanatus had never seen before. This made him wonder how Gustav could come up with such a thing. All other participants wouldn't think of doing this. This kid is really something. Gradier Xanatus couldn't figure out Gustav's thought, so he decided to keep watching him in the meantime. The following day, the participants had begun to follow the light after waking up. It was a long night for many of them since their rumbling stomachs didn't let them sleep. Some participants were able to find food before sleeping. Still, many of them weren't, and now they continued journeying towards the green ball of light with empty stomachs. Normal people would be unable to do this. But the anatomy of mixed bloods had always been enhanced compared to that of humans. Mixed bloods could go running for days without food, water, or dying. They would get weaker doing that, but they could still pull it off. Gustav had already started moving since 2 a.m. in the middle of the night. He didn't need to sleep to regain his energy points because he had already regained them from eating. Still, he decided to chill for a bit and contemplate on some things before he started moving by 2 a.m. when he could have gone earlier. As long as Gustav still had energy points, he could keep running for days without needing rest. Gustav was still in the river region. He had crossed about 7 rivers while moving for the past 4 hours. These rivers were all narrow, so he only needed to jump to cross over some of them. The one he was currently trying to cross through was bigger than the others. Unfortunately, it extended straight northwards, unlike the others. He couldn't jump over this one, so he decided to swim through it. Gustav could generate enough speed and kinetic force to run across the surface of this river. Nevertheless, after thinking about it for a while, he disregarded that thought. He decided that swimming underwater would be the best course of action. Gustav could tell that he would have to face one challenge or the other while passing through this river. He figured that whatever challenge the MBO would set up would come from underwater. So, he decided to swim underwater, where he could spot whatever obstacle he'd have to face firsthand. If he ran above the water, he wouldn't be able to do that. Another thing Gustav noticed since he got the power of the system, his perception couldn't penetrate water bodies very well unless he was within. Frohuhum. Shrohumum. Even though he was underwater, Gustav's body still moved quickly like a sea creature. He held his breath while diving faster than a ski boat underneath the river. He could see lots of small rocks and plants underneath the river as he was swimming. He had to swerve left and right to dodge some rocks that extended high up from the bottom of the river. Chapter 174. He could see lots of small rocks and plants underneath the river as he was swimming. He had to swerve left and right to dodge some rocks that extended high up from the bottom of the river. The river was more than 900 feet deep. However, Gustav could still see clearly with his God's eyes. He kept God's eyes activated while swimming because he didn't want to miss anything. He knew the power of God's eyes was limited since it couldn't see through everything. Nevertheless, it had helped him in sighting many things earlier. So, there was no way he'd decide not to use it here. Those plants ahead have a huge amount of energy points. They must be like the ones that first appeared. Gustav noticed some purplish and red plants up ahead that formed a kind of web underwater. His body could pass through the spaces within the gaps, but Gustav decided not to do that. Vwum! Gustav swam upwards and leaped out of the river. His body ascended more than 50 feet above the water surface while traveling forward with speed. Gustav felt something and looked down at the river as his body traveled across midair. Thish! 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 6 thick purplish and red plant roots shot out of the river below towards him. Each root was as thick as half the body of a fully grown person, and its tip was very pointed. Twirl, twirl! Gustav's body twisted and turned while in midair, causing 4 pointy roots to miss his body. Due to the sudden twist, his body was directly falling towards the 2 roots shooting upwards. Gustav stretched out his hand and grabbed onto the body of the first root he dodged. Swing! He forcefully pulled his entire body forward using the root. Swoosh! The 2 roots missed him by a few centimeters. After dodging all the 6 roots, Gustav straightened his body and made himself descend faster into the water. Splash! He fell back into the water and kept swimming forward with speed. Thish! Thish! Even though Gustav had given the plants behind some gap, it still sent out multiple of its root, all in a bid to reach him. Gustav moved crazily fast underwater, but he could not go faster than these roots that seemed like they could extend infinitely. Even after crossing a distance of 700 feet underwater, the roots were still in pursuit, and were slowly catching up to him. Gustav still kept swimming forward because he knew that there was no way the plant roots wouldn't have a limit of extension. Swee-eye! Swee-eye! He dodged some of the plant's roots as that shot towards him from behind. Good thing I learned breathing control, Gustav said internally. He was glad that he bought the training technique from the system and learned it because he wouldn't hold his breath for this long without it. Gustav felt going above the surface of the water would make him lose mobility. Also, he wouldn't be able to sense the plants coming from behind him. Swee-eye! 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 Gustav successfully dodged the roots repeatedly. As he kept swimming forward, he noticed that the roots were starting to reduce in number, and the remainder had reduced in speed. If only I was able to absorb energy from plants, I'd have killed this stupid thing, he thought. Gustav didn't want to waste time, which was why he decided to evade it. Fighting underwater wasn't something he had tried before, so he knew it would take some time to deal with the plant completely. After a few more minutes, Gustav had passed the range of the plant's root. He slowed down his speed and turned around. He noticed that the purplish and red roots were being retracted. When he was about to continue moving forward, he noticed something moving at fast speed headed towards his location. At the time Gustav noticed it, it was only 100 feet away. The roots had disguised its movement with a certain object. It was a black substance, and from the way it vibrated as it traveled forward, it was obvious that it was liquid, but unlike the water, it was thicker. With its speed, it only took another second to arrive in front of Gustav. Gustav felt that something was weird within this black ball-like substance, so he swung out his palm while activating atomic disintegration. White light coated Gustav's palm as it traveled towards the black substance. Immediately Gustav's palm penetrated it. Plum! The black ball-like substance exploded, dyeing the river black. SHSSHSSHHHHSSHH. A radius of over 1,000 feet underwater was turned pitch black due to this substance explosion. Underwater toxins detected, toxin immunity has been activated. Within the dark, Gustav heard the notifications ring in his ear. I was too careless, Gustav said internally as he swam upwards within the darkness. He wasn't in any way harmed by the explosion due to toxin immunity activation, which prevented the liquid from burning his. Gustav's sense of direction was still pretty solid even though darkness surrounded him. He deactivated God's eyes immediately after the explosion. His reason for this was that God's eyes kept showing negative energy points all around him, which distorted his vision. Even though God's eyes could see through the dark waters, Gustav was at a disadvantage. The negative energy points covered every part of Gustav's line of sight, not giving him the chance to see anything. He decided to deactivate it, and just make use of his senses alone. Vwum! Gustav's head poked out from underneath the river above the surface. He finally opened his eyes and stared at the darkened river around him. Vwum! Gustav swam forward after confirming the right path. In a few seconds he swam past the affected areas. God's eyes has been activated. Gustav breathed in a sigh of relief as he spotted the end of the river over 3,000 feet away. After 2 minutes, Gustav arrived at the end of the river and leaped out of it. Tum! He landed on a small rock in front and took in a breath of fresh air. Chapter 175. He landed on a small rock in front and took in a breath of fresh air. His clothes and hair dripped of water, giving him a kind of radiant look. He had been holding his breath for more than 30 minutes. Finally I passed that region, Gustav muttered while turning around to look back. The attack underwater happened to be one that poisoned living things it made contact with. Gustav had noticed this when using God eyes. For a moment he could see the other plants within the vicinity drying up instantly. This made him realize just how deadly the black substance was. His clothes were still okay because the substance only affected living things, but if he didn't have toxin immunity, his clothes would probably be the only thing escaping that region in one piece. He let out another sigh of relief and turned around to stare at the green ball of light up ahead, which was now very large at this point. It looked so much closer and brighter than before. I think this is the last region I need to cross before getting to the ball of light. Gustav stared at the landscape ahead with a smile. In his line of sight was a landscape filled with rock beds. Rock beds of different colors could be seen up ahead on both sides of the paths. The path ahead was wide enough to fit 10 people walking side by side. Several thousand meters towards the left and right were other paths that also led towards the green ball of light. The paths were what separated the rock beds, if not the entire place would be a field of rock beds. Swoosh! Gustav wasted no time before dashing forward once again. Clang! 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 Sounds of battle rang out as a young man with achy-colored hair faced 2 machines that were built to look like anthropods. Both were up to 3 meters tall. Their height contrasted with that of the boy, who happened to only be 5 feet tall. Swee-eye! 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 He dodged some silky thread-like substances that they shot out and moved towards their back. A red blur was formed due to his intense speed. He arrived behind the anthropod-like machine on the right, and stretched out his hand to grab the leg of the machine. Composition acceleration, he said internally as his eyes glowed a bright red color. Half of the machine's leg instantly lost color and aged. Crack! As the machine turned around and placed that leg on the ground, it instantly began to crack and started crumbling altogether. The machine started falling forward, but it quickly placed another leg in front to support itself. This gave the boy a chance to go deal damage to the other one. He leaped upwards while stretching out both hands, which were coated in red. Bam! His palms made contact with the head of the second machine, and it started turning old. Some part of it crumbled into dust. He immediately reached out his right hand and grabbed onto a round blue object hidden deep within the body of the machine. Glurt! Glurt! Wires and some green liquid spurted out as he ripped out the object and jumped down from the creature. Plop! The lights on the body of the machine immediately turned off and it fell to the ground. Bang! The boy jumped backward, dodging some whitish stream of liquid that shot towards his left side. The other machine that lost one of its legs shot this out and pushed itself forward with the rest of its 5 legs. Of course, it was way slower, so the boy was able to dodge every single one of its attacks easily and arrived behind its legs once again. He reached out his hand and touched another leg. The same thing as earlier happened. The mechanical leg of the creature aged instantly and started crumbling the moment it tried to lean on it. The boy dashed around the body of the creature repeatedly for a minute. By the time he was done, the creature had no other legs to walk on and fell to the ground. The boy finished it off in a few moments, and dashed forward. He was currently closing in on the edge of the forest area he was currently in. After a few minutes, he arrived at the end of the region and stared at the bedrocks up ahead. Good thing I didn't rest throughout the entire night. I should get to the ball of light after this region. His face suddenly lit up with a smile. I will be the first to arrive there, he muttered before dashing forward into the distance. In another part of the test floor, a green-skinned girl holding a sickle conjured from red energy swung it out fiercely at 3 AIs, decapitating them in one go. Even after doing that, the AIs were still headed for her, but their lack of visuals slowed them down. She conjured another sickle and threw both of the ones in her grip. SkrYHH. SkrYHH. They spun vigorously and pierced the chests of both AIs in front. They instantly powered down. She wasted no time in dashing forward towards the one on the left while stretching out her palm. Krakem! A dagger made out of red energy shot out of the middle of her palm and pierced into the chest of the AI also. Krakem! Surprisingly, the AI was still moving even after she did that, but she wasn't done yet. Bam! Her palm slammed into the butt of the red dagger, pushing it further inside. Troyan! The AI immediately powered down. 4 AIs with incomplete body parts could be seen in her surroundings. She had successfully dealt with all of them that attacked her. She wasted no time in moving forward, leave the region she currently was in. Several hundred feet ahead, a landscape filled with bedrocks could be seen. Damn it! Even underground these bastards still came for me! A loud voice could be heard within a dark space. A boy with spiky orange hair could be seen standing on a circular piece of rock that protruded from the ground. This piece of rock was moving him forward at extreme speed, and there happened to be 2 large walls of rock covering his back while he controlled the walls blocking his front to part ways, creating a path for him as he moved along. Chapter 176. He was currently moving underground. Boom! The walls of rock behind him were blasted apart, and 2 large humanoid-looking AIs could be seen chasing after him from behind. The AIs were looking ferocious due to the multiple cannons extending from their bodies. They bolted forward with speed and started closing in the gap between them and the boy while shooting out multiple beams. He quickly turned around and stretched out both his hands to touch the walls on his right and left. Fruaburbururu. The walls rumbled with intensity before crumbling to pieces, causing rocks to fall behind and create another wall. While multiple spikes also shot out of the walls behind, stabbing towards both AIs, they immediately crumbled to pieces the instant contact was made with the body of the AIs. Boom! Boom! The walls he created to defend himself were also blasted into smithereens as the AIs shot out energy beams from their cannons. Bang! The force knocked him backward. His body traveled for several hundred feet before. Bam! He slammed into a part of the wall ahead that he wasn't able to manipulate to open up for him. This part of the wall underground happened to be different from the ones he had been easily controlling earlier. While his body was being catapulted forward earlier due to the blast, he made use of his bloodline ability, and tried to manipulate the walls ahead to open up for him, but it was to no avail, and he ended up slamming into it. The huge AIs were still headed towards him as he kept trying to control the walls ahead to move aside, but he was still unable to. Screw this! Looks like I have to go about this the normal way, he screamed out with a tone of annoyance after standing up. Stomp! He stomped his feet on the ground and was immediately catapulted upwards by the ground underneath. His body ascended into the air, and when he got to the wall up, it opened up a kind of tunnel for him that led to the surface. In a few seconds he was out in the open. He landed on the ground and quickly closed up the manhole he created beneath him. Stomp! 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 He stomped on the ground 3 times and the openings he created underground started crumbling and closing up. Damn it! The boy spat out. Looks like he'll have to continue forward on foot, he voiced out with a repressed look while staring at the landscape in front, which was filled with bedrocks of different colors. Several hours later, some participants were able to successfully pass through the previous regions, started arriving at the last region one after the other. Angie was also among these participants. She was still as energetic as ever, even though she had faced quite a lot of difficulties like the rest before getting here. This was mostly attributed to the fact that she also brought food with her. At this moment, more than 1,000 participants had been eliminated during this phase. Only about 500 were left wandering through the region of rock beds. Embark Tower, floor 602. This hall was where mixed bloods that passed the special test watched the second phase of the MBO entrance test. The second phase of the entrance test wasn't displayed to the public, so they practically got the special privilege to watch since they were considered the best among their peers. Around 50 people were here, and the students from Echelon Academy took up 35% of the population. The rest had graduated from other schools within the city and were considered a prodigy among their peers, but only 3 people among all the students that passed the special test were chosen to be a special class. The special class, just as their name implied, were the ones the MBO considered to be special, and they had special privileges that the MBO planned on revealing at the end of the test. Endrick was among the 3 special classes that were picked in Plankton City. There was also one of Gustav's classmates that was picked, while the third person was from a different school. Today was the second day and also the end of the second phase, yet none of the special classes bothered to show their faces here. Everyone currently within the hall were only mixed bloods that managed to pass the special test. Chatter. 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 The hall was currently noisy due to the footage being displayed on a part of the screen. How is he first? One of them shouted out with a look of disbelief. Dash. I also don't understand. Dash. This must be a dream, right? Dash. How is he powerful enough to even perform these feats? Dash. Unbelievable. I refuse to accept this. The side of the hall where past students from Echelon Academy gathered together was the noisiest. Gee, Ustav. He is way more powerful now compared to the time he defeated me. A very beautiful girl with long black hair muttered while staring at the screen ahead. Here I was thinking I had surpassed him, she added internally with a wry smile on her face. This girl happened to be the most beautiful in the room now. She had slanted eyes along with a doll-like face and beautiful long black hair. The white uniform on her made her look very angelic, but in reality, she was far from being that. What was that, Yahiko? What do you mean by he defeated you? A girl asked from the side. Eh? Did I say that? Yahiko asked with a confused look. I'm pretty sure I heard you say that, the girl beside her said. You must have heard wrong. Yuhiko denied once again. Alright. The girl voiced out with a suspicious look before adding. But do you believe that the person being displayed up there is actually Gustav? The girl asked while pointing at the top left corner of the screen ahead. Yuhiko didn't know how to reply and kept staring forward with a look of bewilderment. I don't believe it's him. It must be another person that looks like him. Let's wait till their names are listed after this face. The girl beside her voiced out. There's no way in hell that this elegant, charming, and powerful guy is Gustav. Most of the girls from Echelon Academy had this thought. On the screen, Gustav could be seen lifting a large boulder that was as big as a large truck while walking forward. Chapter 177. On the screen, Gustav could be seen lifting a huge boulder that was as big as a large truck while walking forward. The entire hall was in a state of disbelief because they didn't think someone would be strong enough to do this. They started wondering if Gustav Bloodline's ability was related to strength. What a spectacular way to overcome the change in gravitational force, Gradier Xanatus thought with an astonished look on his face while staring at the screen in front. At this point in time, Gustav was traversing through the region of bedrocks. Immediately he entered the region, he noticed the change in gravitational force. At first, it was a very light change that couldn't be easily noticed. However, since Gustav had a bloodline related to gravity, he was able to sense it immediately. As he moved forward, he noticed that the gravitational pull kept reducing and reducing. His body was starting to feel lighter, and when he stepped on the ground, barely noticeable dust would float upwards without coming back down. Gustav paused his movement some minutes after entering the region and smiled. He turned around and went back to the beginning of the region. Gustav approached the rock he landed on when he arrived and scrutinized it from top to bottom. It measured up to 90 feet in height. Gustav's hand was coated in a white glow as he punched the rock on specific parts, causing debris to scatter all over the place. He jumped towards the back of the rock after doing that and thrust out both palms. Bam! Immediately his palms made contact with the rock. A big part of it rolled out from the front. A massive hole was formed within the rock as the boulder rolled down towards the region of bedrocks. Gustav passed through the hole he created and came out on the other side. He arrived in front of the enormous boulder and grabbed onto both sides before lifting it. Slight cracks appeared on the parts that he grabbed onto as he lifted it and placed it upon his shoulders. This should be heavy enough to get me all the way across it, Gustav muttered slightly as he took a step forward. Bam! 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 Every step he took caused a thudding sound similar to that of a titan walking across the place. This same event led to what everyone saw on the screen. Gustav had picked up the boulder to increase his weight because he noticed the gravitational changes when he was walking across the region of bedrocks. The farther a person traveled, the more their body weight decreased. Gustav could tell that it would reach a point when a person wouldn't be able to walk on the ground anymore, and everyone would start floating. He was right with his speculation because, at this point, the bedrocks were all in the air, and the only thing that could be seen ahead was a plain landscape. The skies were filled with stones floating upwards, and every step that Gustav took at this point felt light even with the boulder on his shoulder. Gustav could counter the gravitational force because he still had a gravitational energy container. However, he didn't want to reveal that. He had decided that he would be revealing some of his abilities during the entrance test, not all. He would still keep some hidden and reveal some at the right time. At this moment, Gustav could already see the ball of green light up ahead. He reckoned that he would only need to travel for about 1 to 2 hours before arriving there. Contrary to before, his steps were now lighter and hardly making any sound. However, he was still heavy enough to resist the change in gravitational pull. As Gustav progressed, so did a lot of participants that arrived in the region. Unlike him, most of them didn't notice the change in gravitational force until they had moved quite a distance forward. Some of them that noticed it earlier activated their bloodline while moving forward. They didn't think the gravitational pull would keep weakening as they traveled further. The closest participants to the green ball of light after Gustav were the same 3 that Gradius Anatus felt had potential. The boy with ache-colored hair and short stature decelerated the flow of gravitational force. Decelerating gravity allowed him to travel normally across the path between bedrocks that led to the green ball of light up ahead. A red glow of light covered him as he walked forward. Using this bloodline ability sapped a lot of his energy, so contrary to his expectations, he could only walk along the path instead of running to preserve energy. Especially when he noticed that the change in gravitational force increased more and more as he traveled forward. The boy with spiky orange hair couldn't control the ground below like he used to in other regions. He found it really hard to manipulate the ground, so he could only let his legs sink 2 feet into the ground as he kept moving forward. The ground covered his leg as he moved forward 1 step at a time. Due to this factor, he was protected from the change in gravitational force. His body wouldn't float upwards as he traveled further, but he couldn't move as fast as he wanted to. The green-skinned girl surprisingly wasn't really affected by the change in gravitational force. A red aura of light covered her body as she moved forward with ease. It was like she wasn't affected at all. As the 3 of them traveled on different routes towards the ball of green light, they had a similar thought in mind. I will be the first to arrive at the ball of light. Other participants that weren't equipped with a bloodline that could assist them in pulling through this region started floating. Since they did not have the power to fly, they lost their balance. Chapter 178. Other participants that weren't equipped with a bloodline that could assist them in pulling through this region started floating. Since they did not have the power to fly, they lost their balance. Once a person starts floating and couldn't control their movement in the air or had become incapacitated, once they got to a particular height in the sky, something happened. A mysterious glow of light would surround them, and they would disappear. The participants who witnessed this could guess that the set of participants that disappeared has been disqualified. When Angie arrived in this region about 30 minutes ago, she also sensed a change in gravitational force. Still, for reasons known to her, she wasn't bothered. She only smiled and increased her speed of running. Swoosh! At the moment she was closing in on the ball of light as she bolted across the path that led to it. Surprisingly, she wasn't affected by the gravitational force. At the speed at which she was moving, it wouldn't take long before she caught up with the three closest to the ball of light. She would soon meet up with the others, including Gustav, even though they traveled on different routes. 1 hour later, Gustav could already see the ball of light above the ground several thousands of feet away from his position. The green ball of light was bright and shiny, but it wasn't as big as Gustav expected. It was comparable to a 10-story building in height, but it was spherical like an egg. It wasn't very bright, so Gustav wondered why they could see it clearly from their starting point. With the way it was visible from afar, he had expected that coming close to it would severely damage the retinas due to brightness. Surprisingly, things were somewhat different from what he imagined. He looked around and noticed that all the paths led to the particular area where the spherical green light was suspended in the air. Different paths were extending from every direction of the test phase, and they all led towards the green ball of light which happened to be in the middle. Gustav now understood why he never met anyone at the beginning while traveling towards this place. This was because everyone was positioned in a circular format at the ends of the test phase, so when traveling forward, they closed in on the green ball of light from every direction. The green ball of light was in the middle of the space. There was a barricade of light shining down from the spherical green light that touched the ground's surface. Gustav instantly realized that within the space of that barricade of green light was where he needed to enter to complete this phase. He kept walking towards it casually. The small marbles in the air at this point were very dense. By contrast, in the area where the spherical green light was located, nothing could be found in the air. Gustav cautiously walked towards the barricaded light space. He knew how unpredictable things were when it came to the MBO. There had been a lot of surprises since the start of this test phase, so his mind was currently on the alert for any kind of changes around him. After about 10 more minutes of walking, Gustav was only a few feet away from reaching the light shining down from the spherical ball above. He finally got there in a few seconds and stood in front of it with a surprised expression. "Looks like I was mistaken," he said internally while staring at the light wall. He thought there would be some last obstacle that he needed to overcome, but to his surprise there wasn't. Gustav raised his right foot and moved it forward to enter the space, but he realized that he came to a conclusion too soon when his leg made contact with the wall of light. His leg couldn't pass through. It turned out that the light was actually a barrier. He thought he would pass through the light barricade without any obstruction, but it turned out this was the last obstacle that needed to be passed. Calm! 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 Gustav kicked the light barrier thrice with little force, trying to check its sturdiness. He still had the boulder on his shoulder at the moment as he contemplated. The MBO really thought this out. Due to the gravitational force, everyone's body weight will be inexistent. It would be nearly impossible for a weightless person to generate enough force to break through this. Even when equipped with a bloodline that can easily break through things, the circumstances this time is a bit unnerving, he thought. Anyways, no point dwelling on it. Gustav turned around while a charming smile hung on his face. He walked about 100 feet backwards and turned around to face the light wall. He squatted slightly while still lifting the boulder on his shoulders. "This isn't enough to stop me. Dash has been activated." Swoosh! Gustav's body blurred as he streaked across the ground, arriving in front of the light barrier instantly. Gustav pushed the boulder in front of himself as he arrived in front of the light barrier. The boulder made contact with the barrier first while Gustav's body was positioned behind it. Ripples spread across the surface of the light barrier due to the intense impact. Plum! Several thousand feet away, the three participants closest to Gustav approached the green ball of light. They could now see the different paths ahead that led to the green ball of light. Since the paths were starting to reduce in width, they could vividly see the different other paths that led to the green ball of light. The green-skinned girl with a red aura coating her entire body paused her steps as she sensed something and decided to turn around. On the path on her right, about 300 feet behind, the boy with aqua-colored hair could be seen moving at a fair pace. The path on her left, about 400 feet away, the boy with spiky orange hair could be seen taking one step at a time while his legs were sunk into the ground. Both boys suddenly paused their steps as they noticed the girl ahead. A frown appeared on their faces as they turned to the side and also noticed each other. The three of them paused their movement as they discovered one another. Tension suddenly filled the air as they stared at each other warily. Chapter 179. The three of them paused their movement as they discovered one another. Tension suddenly filled the air as they stared at each other warily. "Oh, what do we have here?" The boy with the spiky orange hair was the first to break the silence. "Timmy, I should have known that it will be you. And you too, I knew you were strong, ha ha ha, interesting." He voiced out with a burst of laughter while pointing at the both of them. "I'm surprised you managed to make it here in one piece, loud-mouthed idiot," the green-skinned girl said with a depressed look. "Huh! You little cow tail! I acknowledge your strength, yet you call me a loudmouth," the orange-haired boy shouted with a tone of annoyance while pointing at her. "Who are you calling a cow tail? Do you wish to die, you shitty-haired Dumbo?" she replied while raising her brown tail and pointing it towards the boy. "Huh! It's Rhea, in case you forgot. Am no shitty-haired Dumbo, you cow tail." As both of them bantered amongst each other, Timmy shook his head from the side with a look of pity. "Idiots," he muttered softly before he resumed walking forward. "They'll kill you if you keep calling me that, you little shit." The red ore-like energy surrounding the green-skinned girl intensified as she spoke. "Not if I kill you first, cowtail," Rhea voiced out as he conjured a giant hammer made of rocks from the ground. Both of them stared at each other intensely. Just as Rhea and the green-skinned girl were about to make a move on each other, Rhea noticed something. "Wait. Where's Timmy?" he asked with a blank look. The green-skinned girl turned towards the side to check and also noticed that he had disappeared. They both turned and stared ahead. Their faces shone with a look of realization as they discovered that Timmy had gone on while they were busy bantering. "That shorty!" Rhea shouted out with an urgent look and immediately dashed forward. The green-skinned girl also started running forward the moment she noticed Timmy had gone ahead of them. Rhea's feet were still sunk into the ground to prevent himself from floating upwards. Surprisingly, this time he was able to move faster than before. As expected, the person who had gone the farthest was Timmy, who was more than 100 feet ahead at the moment. Now that he was close to reaching the green ball of light, he did not hold back anymore. His energy was depleting at an insane rate because he was now running. Nevertheless, he didn't mind losing energy as long as he could get to the green ball of light first. In just a few seconds, the green-skinned girl had started closing the gap between them. She was now about 30 feet behind him. She didn't look like she was affected by the gravitational force with the way she was running forward while holding onto the red sickle. Also, unlike the two boys who had slightly pale faces, she didn't look tired. Timmy turned his neck to the side and looked above his shoulder. Damn, what is she? She only needed a few seconds to catch up. What a monster, he muttered while gritting his teeth after noticing that the green-skinned girl was close to catching up. He increased his running speed, causing a red streak of energy to blaze across the ground. The green-skinned girl noticed that he was starting to increase the gap between them and increased her speed. Both of them seemed to have similar bloodlines due to the similar red energy that coated them as they traveled. However, it was apparent that they had different abilities. Damn it! I just had to be in the same group with these monsters, Rhea voiced out with a dark face as he stared at both of them ahead. He was more than 80 feet behind them. I cannot accept being the loser here. Rhea shouted out with a look of determination as the ground boosted his speed. It was hard for him to control the ground here, so sweat started dripping from his forehead as he forcefully manipulated the ground. As seconds passed, he slowly started to catch up to them, but his body was already trembling from a loss of energy. Hiya! His face shone determination and fierceness as he screamed out. The green-skinned girl finally caught up to Timmy after a while. At that same time, they were about 3,000 feet away from the light wall that extended from the green ball light above. Immediately, they saw the space within the wall of light ahead. They instantly figured that they needed to get inside the space to finish the test. The girl slowly started surpassing Timmy. She turned her face to the side and stared at him for a few moments before accelerating again. Timmy gritted his teeth and muttered, "I'm getting there first." After saying this, he pushed himself forward. It became like a game of tag. The green-skinned girl would accelerate and surpass Timmy for a moment. Then Timmy would use more energy to push himself forward, catching up with her. Still, in the next moment, she would accelerate again, surpassing him. He would once again push himself forward by using more energy. Timmy's face was starting to become paler and paler as they closed in on the wall of light ahead. Rhea was already catching up to them and was only about 15 feet away when they crossed the 2,000 feet mark. They were now about 1,000 feet away from getting to the light. As they closed in on the light, they noticed a large boulder sitting on the ground after the wall of light. They didn't think much of it, and instead focused on being the first to arrive there. Timmy noticed that he was running out of juice as they traveled further. The green-skinned girl had now increased the gap between them by about 4 feet. You're tuning into the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.